Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the move of what if Deku felt his soulmate's pain? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Mama? Kirishima yelled as he ran out of his bedroom into the living room where his mother sat. He held the bottom of his t-shirt, a dark blue shirt with designs of sharks printed all over the front, all the way up to his chin, leaving nearly the entirety of his torso exposed. "Yes, Chiquito?" she responded, looking up from the book she had been reading. "There's a lot more flowers." "What do you mean, Mijo?" "The soulmate flowers. There's a bunch of them." Kirishima's mother turned towards where her son stood, shirt still pulled all the way up to his chin, revealing not only his bare torso but also mounds of tiny orange petals falling from his sides in orderly lines. Every few seconds, the petals would begin emerging from yet another line on Kirishima's torso. "Aijiro," she whispered, eyes wide at the sight in front of her. Kirishima was only 11, and his soulmate's age was likely similar. How could this happen to someone so young? She wrapped her arms around Kirishima, pulling him tight into her chest. One hand rested on his back and the other around the back of his head. "It'll be okay." "What do you mean, Mama? What's wrong?" "Aijiro, your soulmate," Ms. Kirishima began saying, unsure about how to proceed. "They're having a hard time. I'm gonna make us some tea, then we can talk about it a bit more, okay?" With a nod, Kirishima ran across the room and hopped onto the sofa, leaving a trail of flower petals behind him everywhere he stepped. In the kitchen, Kirishima's mother, Hikari, put on the water kettle and gripped onto the counter, letting her head fall forward with a sigh. How was she supposed to talk to Aijiro about this? Just a few minutes later, Hikari returned. She sat on the sofa next to her son, passing him a mug of tea Earl Grey with sugar and milk, just as he liked it, and held out a small plate covered in a pile of convenience store butter cookies. Once Kirishima drank some tea and grabbed a cookie, she began talking. "I don't know how much of this you know, how much kids talk at school, or what you've seen online. When they are having a hard time, they use coping methods. There are good coping methods, like things with art, or music, hobbies, and talking to people. But some people also use bad coping methods. Do you know anything about those?" Kirishima shook his head. "Well, using alcohol excessively or doing drugs could be examples of bad coping methods. Another is harming yourself. It's a bad thing to do, but that doesn't make the people who do it bad people. Is my soulmate one of these people who hurts themselves?" Kirishima asked, tears already welling in the corners of his eyes. Why would someone even want to do that to themselves? How much of a hard time must they be having? How much of a hard time must his soulmate be having to resort to this? Even just thinking about it, Kirishima could barely hold back his tears. Hikari sighed. "I think so. Can you promise me 2 things, Mijo?" "What things?" "Promise me you'll tell me if the flowers come back, and promise me that if you ever think about hurting yourself in any way, come to me. I won't be mad, I just want you to be safe and help you," she said. "Yeah, I promise, Mama." A few moments of silence passed between Kirishima and his mother, as Kirishima slowly ate his cookie, thoroughly chewing each bite to make it last longer. "I just hope they're okay," Kirishima said, finally breaking the silence and immediately breaking down into sobs. Thankfully, his mother was there and he was pulled into her arms for yet another hug. "I hope so too." Midoriya had been in his bedroom the first time it happened. He'd had a particularly bad day at school, and was sitting at his desk, wrapped tight in his favorite blanket, and legs held tight to his chest, as he continued rewatching his favorite videos of All Might. He didn't notice it right away. Why would he have? It was just a strange itch. When it didn't stop, Midoriya lifted up his shirt, and flower petals spilled out. He recognized them, what they were from, even though they were on his sides instead of on his wrists where he thought most people did it. He'd thought about doing it himself plenty of times, but never did. He didn't want to scare his soulmate or make his mom sad, and actually doing it seemed pretty scary. Tears began welling up in his eyes as he gathered the petals together, piling them up on his desk. What was his soulmate going through that led them to do this? He kept scooping the flowers away from his side, again and again, but they just kept coming. Make it stop. He let out a small sob. Make it stop, he whispered, fully breaking down crying, wrapping the blanket even tighter around himself. Close to 3 hours later, Midoriya woke up, still at his desk, wrapped tight in his blanket. He hadn't remembered falling asleep, but he knew he must have at some point. He walked out into the kitchen, then to the living room, then to his mother's bedroom, but she was nowhere to be seen. She must be at work again. Midoriya grabbed a piece of paper and pen and began writing a note, knowing it was nearly time for him to leave for school, and she may still be gone when he got home. My soulmates, he crossed the words out. There were a lot of flowers from my soulmate last night. I think they are probably cutting themselves. Instead of leaving the note on the table, he crumpled it up and threw it in the trash instead. He could tell her some other time, when she wasn't so busy. Midoriya didn't tell his mother about his soulmate's issue until close to 10 months later. Now attending UA, many years had passed since Kirishima first found out about his soulmate's issue. It turns out his mother had been right. It had started out just a few times a month, tiny flowers falling from the side of his torso, but as he entered 7th grade, it increased, petals now coming more frequently, every week, and eventually twice a week. As he had moved into 8th grade, the petals began coming from not only his torso, but also his hips, then upper thighs, then lower thighs, then inner thighs too. By the time he was enrolled in UA, Kirishima woke up nearly every morning either his pajama breathes or bed sheets filled to the brim with full-grown flowers rather than the tiny petals it had started as. His soulmate never seemed to harm themselves during the daytime, so Kirishima had never trailed flower petals around in public or had anyone else find out without him directly telling them, and he was thankful for that, but Kirishima couldn't stop worrying about his soulmate's well-being and safety. With how much worse it had gotten over the years, Kirishima was terrified to see how much worse it could get in the future. He was terrified to see what would happen if he wasn't able to find his soulmate and get them help. It was already so bad, and Kirishima couldn't see how it could possibly get any worse without his soulmate's life being endangered. One day, Kirishima was assigned Todoroki as a sparring partner. As they began sparring, some of their classmates began gathering around to watch, having already completed their own sparring matches. Todoroki threw the first attack, which Kirishima easily dodged. Then, Kirishima attempted to get closer to Todoroki in order to attack back, dodging to his left as he thought Todoroki was about to attack his right, but his prediction was incorrect as a spike of ice grazed his leg, dark red blood immediately dripping to the ground. The two boys were about to continue sparring, but then Mina yelled something that made both of them pause. "Oh my God, are you two soulmates?" she yelled. Kirishima's head quickly spun towards Mina, seeing that Midoriya standing just next to her had flower petals falling down from his leg, in the exact same spot that Kirishima's leg had been hit by Todoroki's ice. Midoriya?" Kirishima whispered, his eyes wide in shock as he tried his best to not cry or reveal Midoriya's secret to the rest of his classmates. To his surprise, Midoriya didn't look scared as he expected. Instead, he looked just as sad and concerned as Kirishima did, if not even more so. Kirishima looked over to Todoroki. When they made eye contact, Todoroki just nodded at him, letting Kirishima know that it was okay, that he should go to Midoriya and they can just continue their sparring match another day. Kirishima and Midoriya quickly found themselves together, in a tight embrace. Midoriya's face was shoved into the crook of Kirishima's neck, and Kirishima's arms were wrapped tightly around Midoriya's back, purposefully avoiding his sides because just the previous night, Kirishima found himself laying in his bed, watching flowers fall from that exact spot. "Let's go talk, Kirishima," Midoriya whispered, pulling away from the hug and grabbing his hand, leading him away from the rest of their classmates and towards the locker rooms just next to their training fields. Once they were inside and away from the rest of the students, Midoriya was the first to speak. "Kirishima, are you all right? I mean, well, have you been harming yourself?" As soon as the words left Midoriya's mouth, he began quickly mumbling, "I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't asked. Of course you've been harming yourself. Who else would it be? And you probably don't even want to talk about it anyways. Kirishima placed his hand on Midoriya's shoulder, interrupting him mid-sentence. Dude, I was about to ask you the same thing. It wasn't me. Kirishima lifted his shirt, revealing his sides and stomach, clear of any scars. I thought the flowers were coming from you. Midoriya looked up in confusion, reaching his hand towards Kirishima's torso for half a second, nearly skimming the scarless skin with his fingers, and then quickly pulling away. It's not me either, Midoriya whispered, pulling his own shirt up, revealing 1 or 2 scars that were obviously from training and fights, not from self-harm. So, do we have a third soulmate or something? Unless there was a mistake and we're not, Kirishima said, spouting out nearly every word that came to his mind. It has to be a third soulmate. Or else we wouldn't both know about. You know what I mean. Kirishima nodded, agreeing with Midoriya, then once again spoke. Before we go back, can I hug you again? Without responding, Midoriya threw himself into Kirishima's arms, nearly knocking the other boy over. It's hard knowing they're out there struggling, isn't it? Midoriya whispered. But at least we have each other now. Hey guys, guess what? Mina said excitedly as she walked into the classroom, Midoriya and Kirishima following just behind her. Kiri and Midoriya are soulmates. She yelled. There were waves of "wait seriously" and "congratulations" across the whole classroom. Out of the corner of his eye, Kirishima saw Bakugo rushing out of the classroom, but didn't think much of it. It's not like that was too abnormal for Bakugo to run around doing whatever the hell he wanted, even sometimes missing class because of it. I knew I was soulmates with Deku. I would have told him, if I ever made it to 18, but now he has Kirishima. Dumb effing Deku won't even want me. Dumb effing me for thinking that he would ever want me in the first place. They went home together today. I wonder if they're having a good time together. They probably are. They found each other, so why would they ever go looking for their other soulmate? That is, if I even am Kirishima's soulmate too. Maybe I'm only Deku's. Maybe Deku didn't even tell him he had another soulmate, so that he and Kirishima can be happy together and not have to worry about his dumb effing depressed soulmate. He'll never find out it's me anyways, so what's the point anymore? That day, Midoriya came over to Kirishima's house after school. Nearly as soon as they got to his house and made their way to Kirishima's bedroom, both boys froze, a feeling of dread fully overcoming both of them. Sheet. Midoriya whispered. Kirishima sunk to the ground in front of his bed in defeat, and Midoriya proceeded to do the same just next to him, resting his head onto Kirishima's shoulder. The flowers that now scattered the floor, having fallen from underneath both Kirishima and Midoriya's shirts. Midoriya reached down to the ground, picking up one of the flowers, an orange and deep red marigold. Isn't it so ironic? Midoriya whispered, holding out the marigold in front of the two of them, how pain creates such appealing things. Kirishima just took the flower from Midoriya's hand, holding it up close to his face, looking at each and every tiny petal. They've never done this during the day before. Ever. Kirishima said. I wonder what made today so different for them. I doubt it, but what if they're in our class? What if it's 'cause they know? 'Cause we found each other, but they didn't. Maybe that could be it. It won't do you any good to think about it too much though. Then, there was a knock at the door. I brought you boys a snack, Kirishima's mother said from outside, walking in holding a tray of apples, peanut butter and crackers, just a second later. Thanks Mama, Kirishima said. His mother was about to leave the room, but Kirishima stopped her, saying, Hey, can we talk for a second? Kirishima's mother stepped further into the room, sitting down on the floor next to her son and Midoriya, asking what was going on. Midoriya Izuku is my soulmate. Oh Karino, she whispered towards Midoriya, reaching out a hand and setting it comfortably on the boy's shoulder. But, Kirishima continued, he's not the one the flowers are from, we both have a third soulmate, and I hope you're okay with that. Of course I am, Ijiro. Kirishima's mother wrapped her son in a tight embrace, and then proceeded to do the same to Midoriya, letting him lean into her arms. 6 months had passed since Kirishima and Midoriya had found out they were soulmates, and they felt no closer to finding their third soulmate than they did on the first day they met. It seemed like their relationship had become a bit more normal, Or at least as normal as it can be when you know that you have another soulmate who is severely struggling and you can't even find. In addition to that, it seemed that since they had found each other, their soulmate's self-harm had just gotten worse. "Can I please have a honeydew boba smoothie?" Kirishima asked, standing at the front counter of their local pho restaurant. "And I'll have an avocado boba smoothie," Midoriya added. When they went to sit down and wait for their smoothies, the two boys began talking about their upcoming school assignments. Their most recent assignment had been a free choice essay, having to do with any historical event that they chose. Kirishima had ended up writing an essay on the 1904 Olympics, whereas Midoriya had chosen to write an in-depth hero analysis, which was no surprise to anyone. Just after they had gotten their smoothies, the two boys looked down to find their table had gathered a small pile of flowers, falling from one line on their outer arm just below the elbow. Both Kirishima and Midoriya were hoping that it wasn't the usual reason for there to be flowers, and considering there was only one and the location, Kirishima and Midoriya were probably right. "I have an idea," Midoriya said, already reaching for his phone. "Did anyone get an injury on their right forearm just now? My friend who hasn't found their soulmate yet has some flowers coming from there, and I thought I might as well check." He typed out, sending it to the Class 1A group chat. The only responses they got were no's and nopes. "No luck," Midoriya said, going back to his smoothie with a much more subdued mood than before. "Hey, Baku bro. I feel like I haven't seen you in forever," Kirishima yelled, running over to Bakugo's table at lunch. "Well, maybe you should take a hint then," Bakugo mumbled. To be honest, he didn't want to avoid Kirishima, and Deku too. He just didn't want to ruin their relationship with each other. They were just so perfect he didn't even know what he could do. "What did you say?" Kirishima asked, sitting down in the seat across from Bakugo. "It was nothing. What do you need anyways, shitty hair?" "I just wanted to talk, since we haven't talked in a while. Do you not have a lunch?" he asked, noticing that despite being in the cafeteria, Bakugo had no food, nor an empty tray anywhere near him. "I didn't feel like waiting in the line," Bakugo said, telling the truth. Or mostly the truth. In reality, the main reason was because his most recent relapse had been unexpectedly bad and the injuries hurt worse standing, and he didn't want to have to stand any more than needed. "You should have some of mine then," Kirishima said, pushing his tray forward between the two of them. Bakugo just nodded, picking up the silverware and eating a few bites of rice. "You can have more than that. I've already eaten enough, so you can have the rest." Kirishima pushed the tray the rest of the way in front of Bakugo. In response, Bakugo just nodded, eating the food. Kirishima sat silently staring at him. Why was Bakugo eating with his left hand? He was right-handed, wasn't he? Kirishima looked closer at Bakugo's right arm, seeing that his uniform seemed to be bumpy and tight-fitting, as if he had on other layers underneath the shirt. "What happened to your arm?" Kirishima asked, reaching out and skimming his fingers over Bakugo's arm. "What do you mean, what happened to my arm?" Bakugo said, quickly pulling his arm away from Kirishima. "You flinched," Kirishima said. "It's just a little training injury. Nothing serious." Bakugo felt bad for lying, but he couldn't very well get so specific that Kirishima realized they were soulmates. And he definitely didn't want Kirishima to find out about the real cause of his arm being injured. "Thanks for the lunch, shitty hair," Bakugo said, standing up from the table. "I'm gonna go back to class now." Kirishima woke up in the middle of the night, close to 4 a.m. Knowing he wouldn't be able to fall back asleep, Kirishima padded across his bed, grabbing for his phone. Missed call, Bakubro, 1:24 a.m. Why had Bakugo called him? Bakugo never called him, especially not in the middle of the night. "Hey Bakugo, are you still up?" Kirishima typed, pausing for just a second before hitting the send button. When the message was marked as read within just a few seconds, Kirishima decided to call him. The phone rang 2 times, and then Bakugo picked up. "What do you need?" Bakugo grumbled. "Why'd you call me in the middle of the night?" "Sorry. Won't happen again." No, don't apologize." "What was going on?" "Nothing. It's fine now, so you should go to bed." Kirishima signed, knowing something had happened. Bakugo wouldn't just call him in the middle of the night for no reason. Something must have happened. Bakugo just didn't seem even able to tell him. Are you safe right now? Kirishima asked with hesitance. Bakugo was silent. Usually, he would have just automatically said yes, no matter what he was feeling, but he didn't know if he could bring himself to lie without crying. How are you not safe right now? Someone near you? Yourself? Just had a bad night, I guess. Wasn't safe with people around me, but now just myself, no one else. He didn't know why he'd been honest, but something compelled him to, even if he didn't want to get too close to Kirishima. How are you not safe with yourself? Kirishima asked. Don't want to talk about it, just if you're not too tired, will you please stay on the phone with me? Of course. Do you want to talk about anything? Or want me to tell a story? That's what I've been doing when Aiza's not feeling great. Bakugo's breath hitched in his throat as he felt a lump building in the bottom of his throat and held back his tears. Story please, Bakugo said, his voice cracking in the middle, still struggling not to cry. You want a darker kinda sad story, or something funny and chaotic? Darker one. So there's this kid Mer. They have curly faded purple hair that covers their eyes. One day, when Mer was walking through the forest, they ran across a badger. They followed the badger through the forest, until they lost sight of the badger. Looking around, Mer realized they had no clue where they were. As they continued walking, Mer found a strange clearing, filled with makeshift gravestones. 4 of them were marked as Caitlin, Harriet, Abe and Bessie. One other had nothing but a date, and off to the side, laid one gravestone, fully unmarked. Mer continued on walking until they found themselves at a cabin. When they stepped inside, everything was covered with at least an inch of dust. There were 2 rooms. The room Mer stepped into seemed to be the main room, with a Dutch oven-looking thing, a table, a chair, a piano, and a violin. With everything covered in so much dust, the violin looked out of place as it was perfectly clean. From a doorway to the second room, a shadow stepped out. Who are you? The shadow didn't speak as it stepped closer to Mer. As it stepped closer, Mer could see that it looked more like a boy, wearing a loose linen shirt, suspenders, and 3/4 length briefs. The boy yet again stepped closer to Mer, and began circling, as if they were inspecting them. Mer now saw that the boy seemed somehow washed out, and maybe even translucent. The boy introduced himself as Raymond, and proceeded to ask who Mer was. For hours the 2 kids talked, Raymond talking about his life, or past life, as Mer learned, and Mer talking about theirs. Just before the sun was about to set, Mer had to return home, knowing that their mom would still be at work and they needed to make dinner for their sister. From then on, Mer returned to the cabin in the woods as often as they could. Eventually Mer decided to ask about the gravestones they had found the first day that they found Raymond's cabin. Raymond first told Mer about Caitlin. Caitlin had been Ray's mother, but had sadly passed away when he was close to 6 or 7 years old, in childbirth with her 4th child, the gravestone only marked with a date. Noticing that Kirishima's speaking was getting slower and more slurred, Bakugo interrupted him before the story continued. You should get some sleep, shitty hair, Bakugo mumbled. You sure you'll be okay? Kirishima asked. Yeah, I'm feeling better now. You should tell me the rest of the story another day. I liked it. Though Kirishima may not have noticed it, as he was preoccupied with making sure Bakugo was okay, Midoriya had. For the first time in weeks, their soulmate had not had a relapse in the night. Kirishima and Midoriya laid together, in the grass at a park between their houses and the school. It was an appealing day outside, and they had decided to hang out there rather than at either of their houses for the change of scenery. What if our other soulmate's Bakugo? Kirishima asked out of nowhere. Why would it be Kaken? I feel like I'd know after knowing him so long, and he seems so… I don't know. Like he wouldn't be the type to self-harm, you mean? Yeah. Just, he's always so strong, it sometimes seems like he's not even capable of being vulnerable. I know what you mean, but… That day you had a test to make up during lunch, I sat with him, and he had this weird bandage on his arm, under his shirt, and wouldn't tell me what it was. Same place where we got the flowers when we were getting boba. Midoriya hummed along, listening to his boyfriend, but still being unsure, how could it be Bakugo without them already knowing? And last night? What happened last night? Midoriya asked. Other than there being no relapses for the first time in weeks. Oh my god, I didn't even notice, Kirishima said with a gasp. Last night, Bakugo called me. I didn't see it till 4, but when I did, I called him. I asked him if he was safe and he said no. He said that earlier he wasn't safe with other people, but when I was calling him he wasn't safe with himself. It all just seemed so off for him. I ended up staying on the phone for a while, telling him a story as a distraction. That's either a weird as hell coincidence or not a coincidence at all, Midoriya responded. I don't want Bakugo to be struggling with self-harm, but also, he is pretty hot, and I would not mind a single bit if he was our soulmate, Kirishima said, successfully lightening the mood a bit. Oh, do you have a crush on Bakugo? Midoriya teased, pulling out the length of his words. Kirishima was silent for a second before continuing saying, only a bit. When he spoke, his face turned nearly as bright red as his hair, and Midoriya could evidently tell it was a bit more than only a bit. What's going on, Aizu? Kirishima asked. It was close to midnight, and Midoriya was calling Kirishima. They did it again this evening, you know? Midoriya whispered, his voice distorted again through the phone. Yeah, I know. Kirishima paused. Was something different than usual? That I didn't notice? But nothing on their end. So something on our end then? I never told you. I've never done what they do, but I get urges sometimes. And tonight when they did it, I got a really bad urge to do it too. Aizu, do you need me to come over? No, just, can you please stay on the phone with me and talk to me? Of course I can. Is there anything you want to talk about? I don't feel like talking, but could you tell me a story? Until I can fall asleep? Okay, we'll do that. I'm gonna hang up and call you back on FaceTime, okay? Less than 30 seconds later, Kirishima's concerned face appeared on Midoriya's phone screen. So, you want me to tell a story? While you try to go to sleep? Kirishima asked, to which Midoriya just nodded. Okay, so, there's a train. It's all dark and dreary, no passengers at all. The only person in the train, or thing I should say, is the driver. He's tall and skinny, shoulders and elbows poking out in odd directions. His whole body is a bluish gray, and the entire front of his face is flat. They have no nose or mouth, at least that we can see. Instead, his face is taken up by 2 vacant eyeballs, the shapes of tall ovals. He doesn't know who he used to be, just that he used to be someone. He thinks that maybe he used to be a passenger, rather than being the driver. Just as he thinks that, the door of the train slides open, and a passenger walks inside. He looks to see that it's a boy. The boy, Lou, has dark hair shaven down to his scalp, and sunken eyes with a look of utter desperation. His shirt is gray, thin and faded from how many times it has been worn and washed. The driver waves, yet knows Lou won't wave back. He waves to all the passengers, even though he knows they can't see him. The driver thinks, maybe that's how he became the driver. Maybe he was a passenger. One who did wave back to the old driver. Kirishima pauses for a moment, looking at the phone and seeing that his boyfriend fell asleep. He sighed, laying down, still staring at the phone. Why hadn't Midoriya told him until now that he sometimes felt the same way as their soulmate did? Whatever the reason was, Kirishima was just glad Midoriya had felt safe enough to call him and ask for a distraction. Midoriya sat alone in his bedroom, close to midnight. Even if he wasn't in his bedroom, he would still be alone. His dad was never home as he worked out of the country. He'd never been a bad father in the sense of hitting Midoriya or saying bad things about him. He'd just practically never been a father at all. His mother tried her best and he loved her for it, but often she had to take long and/or overnight shifts that left Midoriya all alone for hours of the night. When he was younger, he had had urges to harm himself, but when his soulmate started, they had gone away for the most part. But for some reason, over the past few weeks, they had been coming back. The previous night, after their soulmate relapsed, he really had nearly done it. He had gotten a blade and everything, but then instead he called Kirishima. He would feel bad having to call Kirishima about this 2 nights in a row, but he didn't know what else to do. When his soulmate began doing it, just after midnight, like clockwork, Midoriya couldn't bring himself to call Kirishima. Instead, as the flowers were coming out of his torso and legs, he lifted up the blade and quickly ripped it across his thigh, hoping that the flowers would blend in on Kirishima's end, so he would never have to know. Midoriya pulled the blade across 3 more times, watching the blood seep out of his legs and onto his sheets. Midoriya was a bit too preoccupied watching his own blood slowly drip down his thighs, but after the first cut, his soulmate had abruptly stopped creating new injuries, and the flowers had slowed down to a stop. It felt stranger than Midoriya had imagined so many times before when he had urges or when his soulmate had been doing it. As he pulled the blade across, it felt as if it got hooked on his skin with tiny barbs. For a moment, it turned white, before filling in with deep red blood. Did that mean he went too deep? The first few seconds it didn't even seem to hurt, but then just a few seconds later his leg began burning, feeling as if his leg had caught fire. Bakugo sat in his bathroom in the dark. His parents had already gone to bed, so he didn't want to wake them with the light. As the blade was set against his side, something strange and brightly colored caught his eye. Looking down to the floor, he saw a deep purple flower. Pulling his bottoms away from his thighs, Bakugo could see flowers falling from one line across his thigh. What happened? Was it Deku or Kirishima? Then a second line was drawn across his thigh. And then a third. He's hurting himself, isn't he? Bakugo threw his blade onto the counter and picked up a handful of flowers. Weren't injuries usually just petals? Unless they were more than just scuffs from training. Was his soulmate going to be okay? Bakugo tried his best to not cry, but he couldn't do it. Hot messy tears fell down his face and snot covered his whole upper lip as Bakugo began sobbing into the nearest cloth item he could grab, which happened to be a t-shirt. It's my fault, isn't it? They wouldn't have done that if I hadn't started it first. God, I hate myself for doing that to them. Weren't the flowers last night a bit weird? Kirishima asked the next day as Kirishima and Midoriya were eating their lunches. How were they weird? Midoriya asked, trying to sound nonchalant and make sure that Kirishima didn't find out he had done it too. There were 2 kinds of flowers. That's only happened 2 or 3 times before. That's weird. Midoriya paused. You want to go to dinner sometime this week? Midoriya said, doing his best to shift the attention away from last night's flowers. Sounds good to me, Kirishima said, placing his hand on Midoriya's thigh and squeezing. Midoriya just tried hiding his grimace with a smile as he bit the inside of his cheek to prevent any visible reaction to how bad Kirishima's hand hurt. Bakugo sat in the lunchroom, just a few tables away from Midoriya and Kirishima. Which one of them was it? Kirishima seemed to be acting fairly normal, and so did Midoriya. They did already have 3 soulmates instead of 2, so maybe there was a 4th soulmate. Maybe it wasn't Midoriya or Kirishima who did that to themselves. Though Bakugo didn't want someone else to struggle with what he struggled with, he couldn't help but wish they had a 4th soulmate. Every time he imagined Midoriya or Kirishima, alone, beginning to do the same thing he had for years now, he felt like he was going to vomit. It was his fault, he knew it was. He wasn't one for all that soft, fluffy bullshit, but he wanted someone to be there for them. He knew he couldn't be that one, he couldn't let himself get close to Midoriya or Kirishima, but he hoped that whoever wasn't the one to do it knew. He hoped they would help. Then Midoriya made a weird face. Kirishima didn't seem to have noticed, but Bakugo sure as hell did, and to him, it looked like Midoriya was in pain. His eyes floated down to Midoriya's thigh, where the cuts would be, and saw Kirishima's hand placed over them, squeezing his thigh. It looked like a normal gesture of affection, which was pretty typical between soulmates, and from Kirishima's face that did seem to be his intent, yet Midoriya's grimace told another story. It's Deku. It's even Deku. And Kirishima doesn't know. Bakugo felt like he was going to puke again. He felt the bile rising in his throat and tears building in the corners of his eyes as he rushed out of the cafeteria and towards the bathroom, leaving his food tray behind with nearly a full serving of lunch left on it. Just as Midoriya and Kirishima were on their way to their first hour, yet again, they felt the flowers, this time falling from both of their thighs. I'm gonna run to the restroom to clean this up, Kirishima said, and Midoriya followed just behind. The bathroom was grimy, as all school bathrooms seemed to be, and the stalls were covered in drawings of DS and curse words. One stall was open, but the other was shut, and Midoriya nearly turned around as soon as he realized that someone else was in there. Then again, he didn't want to sit with petals and flowers in his breathes all class, so he didn't have much of a choice. Kirishima just pulled his breathes down, shaking the flowers out onto the floor and then picking them up to put in the trash can. Midoriya, on the other hand, with injuries across his thighs, did his best to grab the flowers without revealing the injuries and simultaneously trying to not press on them and make himself flinch. Nearly 2 minutes later, a stall door opened. "What the F are you two idiots doing here with your breathes half off?" Bakugo yelled. Or at least Kirishima had his breathes half off, whereas Midoriya was pulling flowers out of his breathe legs with his breathes fully on. Only Bakugo knew why. He knew what they were doing in here, and it took everything in him to not break down once he actually saw them here together, proving they were actually soulmates. "It's a bit complicated," Midoriya began saying. He looked toward Kirishima, non-verbally seeing if it would be okay to tell Bakugo the truth. When Kirishima nodded, Midoriya continued, "Ijiro and I have a third soulmate who gets hurt a lot, so we were cleaning up the flowers. Please don't tell anyone, Kaken." Bakugo nodded and tried rushing out of the bathroom, before his emotions were going to explode, but Kirishima grabbed his arm before he could make it out. "Dude, is that blood?" Kirishima whispered, lifting Bakugo's hands closer to his face, seeing that his fingertips were covered in small, barely visible slits and smears of red. "I really need to go dash," Bakugo tried saying, his voice much more frantic than his usual tone. "Bakugo, listen to me," Kirishima said, still solidly refusing to release Bakugo from his strong grip. "I want you to know either way we care about you and we'll be here for you. We just want to know, I know it's unlikely but we've just been looking for so long and don't want to take any chances." "And what do you want me to do about that?" "Just lift your shirt a tiny bit. Or your breathes." "No fucking way, creep," Bakugo yelled, yet again trying to pull away from Kirishima's grasp. Bakugo felt a hand rest on his shoulder, and turned to see Midoriya. "Please, Kaken," the boy whispered. He sounded desperate in a way Bakugo we had never heard him speak before. He sounded scared. Finally, Bakugo was able to rip away from Kirishima's grasp and run out of the bathroom, too quickly to be followed by Midoriya and Kirishima, who still hadn't finished rebuckling their belts after cleaning away the flowers. "Could it have been him?" Midoriya asked hesitantly. "I would say no, but he was just acting so weird, so scared. And the other day he called me in the middle of the night and was acting off then too. We need to try talking to him about it again later," Kirishima responded. Back in the classroom, Midoriya and Kirishima sat at their desks waiting for Aizawa to take attendance. "Has anyone seen Bakugo?" "He's late," Aizawa asked, making both Midoriya and Kirishima immediately jump up from their seats. "Do you two know something?" he asked. "We'll go find him," Kirishima said, already grabbing Midoriya by the wrist and pulling him out of the classroom before Aizawa even had a chance to protest. They ran throughout the school building, checking every bathroom, every empty classroom, and even on the roof, but Bakugo was nowhere to be found. "We could check his house," Midoriya suggested. "Is it really okay for us to leave the school?" "I think it's fine just this once. I just have a really bad feeling about this. Even when he was little, Kaken just doesn't deal well with strong emotions and that sort of thing." The two of them were already speed walking their way out of the school and down the road to Bakugo's house, but when they started leaving a trail of pale blue flowers and petals behind them, they started running, each of their concern increasing by the second. The two boys stood in front of Bakugo's house, sweaty and out of breath, pounding on the door relentlessly nonetheless. When the boys called Bakugo's phone, they could hear a faint ringing coming from inside the house, but Bakugo hung up on them after just 2 rings. At that, Midoriya could tell Bakugo wasn't going to come out, and decided to take matters into his own hands. He reached into the mailbox, grabbed the key from the bottom, and unlocked the door. The house was dark, and it nearly seemed as if no one was home. "Kaken? Are you here?" Midoriya yelled. There was no response, but both Midoriya and Kirishima could hear quiet shuffling coming from Bakugo's bedroom. "Kaken, we know you're here. Just please," Midoriya said, "come out and talk to us. Leave me alone, nerd." For once, Bakugo was quiet, and sounded nearly even out of breath. Midoriya slowly walked up to Bakugo's bedroom, and Kirishima followed just behind. The bedroom door wasn't fully shut, as Bakugo had assumed that he was going to be the only one in the house for at least the next few hours. Pressing a hand onto the door, Midoriya let Bakugo know that they were coming in, and pushed the door the rest of the way open. Bakugo was seated on the floor, only wearing his boxers and surrounded by bloody tissues and paper towels. "Oh my god, there's blood," Midoriya choked out, falling to the ground next to Bakugo. It's you." Midoriya lifted his shirt just enough to reveal the petals falling from his torso from the same locations that Bakugo had injured himself. Realizing that Midoriya and Bakugo had both frozen up in shock of the situation, Kirishima rushed over to Bakugo, grabbing the paper towels and pressing them against Bakugo's wounds. "You two should really leave." "I'll be fine," Bakugo tried saying, his voice barely even a whisper, but he was interrupted by Kirishima. "We're not leaving. You're our soulmate, and even if you weren't, we would never leave you like this." "Stop." Bakugo struggled to hold back his tears. "Stop saying that. I'm not your FNG soulmate. You have each other. You don't need me." "Bakugo. We do need you. We care about you so much more than you realize." Kirishima bent down to Bakugo's level, quietly saying, "Let's go get you cleaned up." "Can you walk?" Midoriya asked, reaching a hand down to Bakugo to help him stand. "Yeah, I can walk perfectly fine," Bakugo snapped back. He stood, but the moment he was upright, his knees buckled beneath him, his vision blurred, and he grasped at the air in front of him, struggling to stay balanced. Kirishima tried wrapping an arm around Bakugo, but the boy shied away from his touch, wobbling from standing on his own. Blood dripped down his legs and torso, and he was shaking nearly too much to walk, but Midoriya and Kirishima each took one of his hands, helping him stay steady enough to make it to the bathroom. How did I not know? How did I not notice what you were going through? And that you were my soulmate?" Midoriya whispered. The three of them made their way into the bathroom before Bakugo responded. "'Cause I knew, but my mom said it was wrong. That boys don't have boy soulmates. And it's not like we've even been that close in years." Kirishima helped Bakugo sit down in the bathtub and said, "I'm sorry that happened to you. It must have been really weird to find out about Izuku and I being soulmates." Just nodding, Bakugo leaned back against the tile of the bathroom wall. "Hey Kaken, what do we do now?" Midoriya asked. What do you mean? Like taking care of these? How do you usually take care of them?" Midoriya said, gesturing towards Bakugo's injuries. I usually just tape some on paper towels and leave it. The tape's under the sink dash. Kirishima butted in. "Okay, we're obviously not doing that. First we need to clean the blood off." Bakugo reached to turn on the bathwater saying, "This should work, right?" Midoriya began searching through the cabinets to find dark washcloths that blood couldn't be seen on, and threw one to Kirishima. The washcloth was dipped in the water, and Kirishima began gently wiping the blood off of Bakugo's torso. "I honestly expected my soulmates to freak out a lot more, or care a lot less, I guess," Bakugo said, just mumbling the second half. "Of course we care, Kaken. And sure, we're plenty worried, and I'm not gonna lie, I am a little freaked out still." Midoriya reached out, grabbing Bakugo's hand, placing it on his chest, letting him feel how fast his heart was racing. "See?" Bakugo nodded. "But we've both known about the self-harm for a long time, and we've had years to spend thinking about it and thinking about you." Kirishima nodded in agreement, and then proceeded to get up in search of a medical kit. Taking over the spot where Kirishima had been sitting, Midoriya took the washcloth, putting pressure on Bakugo's torso where he had not yet stopped bleeding. As Bakugo closed his eyes and let his head fall back onto the wall, Midoriya started panicking. "Hey," he said, patting Bakugo's face. "Are you awake? Did you pass out? Do we need to go to the hospital?" he continued, his voice getting faster and higher with every word. Before Kirishima even had a chance to respond, Bakugo spoke up. "I'm just resting. And don't you dare take me to a hospital." "Why no hospital?" Kirishima asked. "They'll want to put me in the psych ward and they'll call my parents." Do they know?" Midoriya asked, pausing to look up into Bakugo's eyes. Bakugo nodded. The bathtub was drained of the orange-tinted water, and Bakugo was suddenly surrounded by a fluffy towel, one around his body and another on his hair. As Kirishima began patting Bactine over Bakugo's injuries, he hesitated for a second, but then decided to ask, How did they react? Well, my mom says I'm a selfish little beach, and anyone dumb enough to cut themselves deserves it. She even told me I didn't go deep enough once. My dad, he wasn't so bad, I guess. He thinks it's dumb and I'll grow out of it, but if he knows, he'll bandage me up and sometimes make me some food. I'm sorry they're that way. You know, you're not dumb or selfish for this at all. Midoriya sat on the tub's edge next to Bakugo, letting Bakugo lean onto him. We don't want you to harm yourself, but you obviously need help and support, not people saying asinine shit like that to you. Your parents don't give that to you, but Jiro and I will. My mom said the same thing the first time she found out about the flowers and all, Kirishima added. Bakugo just listened, now fully relaxing his head on Midoriya's shoulder. The front door of the house opened, making everyone freeze as they figured out whether it was Mitsuki or Masaru. Then, the three boys heard Masaru mumbling to himself. He had begun walking to his bedroom, but stopped when he saw Bakugo, Midoriya, and Kirishima in the bathroom. Did you do it again? He asked Bakugo. What do you fucking think? Bakugo snapped back. Okay, well, you guys seem to have it under control. Just make sure to clean up before Mitsuki gets home. And with that, Masaru walked off to his bedroom. Kirishima and Midoriya were shocked by his lack of caring, but they were incredibly thankful that it hadn't been Mitsuki to get home first instead. Kirishima and Midoriya quickly finished wrapping the bandages around Bakugo's torso and legs, and then helped him back to his bedroom to find clothes to change into. Can you guys spend the night at my house tonight or something? I'm not comfortable leaving you alone here, honestly, Midoriya said, directing the second sentence at Bakugo. I'll call my mom once we're over there, Kirishima said, whereas Bakugo just nodded, saying they'd be fine with it, even though what he really meant was that they wouldn't notice he was gone, and even if they did, they wouldn't care. Izuku opened the front door, walked inside and yelled, "Hey mom, I'm home." My boyfriend's Bakugo's face turned bright pink. Are going to spend the night if that's okay. Midoriya turned slightly towards Bakugo, trying to see if he was okay with that label. For a split second, the room was tense, as Midoriya worried that he had overstepped by using a label he hadn't yet cleared with Bakugo. Looking up at Bakugo's face, Midoriya saw the light blush covering Bakugo's cheeks, and it seemed that he was perfectly okay with being called by that label. Okay, honey, his mother yelled back from the living room, until something registered in her mind. Wait, was that singular or plural? It was plural, Mom. Inko rushed to the front door, already asking, "So you found them? Who are they?" Then she saw Bakugo, standing at her front door, between Midoriya and Kirishima. Hi, Auntie. Bakugo said, his voice hesitant and questioning. Do you guys have a fourth soulmate? There's no way, Inko said, more to herself than anyone else, as her voice was just a whisper. Bakugo went quiet and began avoiding eye contact. No, it's Kakin, Midoriya said, grabbing Bakugo's hand and squeezing it as some sort of comfort for the situation. Inko didn't say anything, staring wide-eyed at the boy she had known nearly his whole life. It was difficult for her to grasp this new information in her mind. Izuku and Bakugo had known each other since they were still tiny children, so how had they not realized that they were soulmates? And what was going on that led Bakugo to have such struggles over the past years? As soon as she snapped out of her trance of shock, Inko quickly shuffled over to the boy, pulling him in a large hug. He had to restrain himself from pulling away, but after a few seconds, Bakugo let himself relax, leaning into Inko's tight embrace. One of her arms wrapped around his back, just slightly rubbing back and forth, whereas Inko's other hand sat on the back of his head, which now rested in the crook of her shoulder. It'll be okay, honey, Inko whispered, still refusing to let go of Bakugo. How did we not know you're Aizawa's soulmate? Pulling away from Inko's grasp, Bakugo began speaking, his voice just a whisper. I knew. I just wasn't allowed to say. Cause of Mitsuki. She wouldn't. Inko whispered to herself, more so in a state of shock that her friend would do something so horrid rather than in denial and trying to claim that it didn't happen and that her friend wasn't in fact homophobic. I'm so sorry, sweetie. You can always come over here if you need anything or you're struggling with her, okay? Inko led the three boys to the kitchen and went to grab them a few snacks from the pantry cabinet. When she returned, she sat at the table, scooting over a package of cookies and 2 sliced apples over to her son and his boyfriends. Katsuki, I have to ask, Inko said, do Mitsuki and Masaru know about? They know, Bakugo responded quickly, interrupting her mid-sentence. He didn't want to have to hear others say out loud what they now all knew he did. And, I know you might not want to talk about this, but, is there anything that still needs to be bandaged or anything like that? She asked hesitantly. Kirishima was the one to respond saying, he doesn't. When Izuku and I started thinking it was him, we ended up getting worried and just going to his house and then we bandaged him up there just before we came here. That's too many FING pronouns. You can call me Katsuki, you know? Bakugo said in response. Okay, well, that's good. I bet you guys want some time alone, but if you need me, just call. And help yourselves to any snacks if you need more. This place hasn't changed a single bit since you were 5 years old, Demon Nerd. Bakugo chuckled as they entered Midoriya's bedroom. There were All Might posters plastered all across the walls, and various hero figurines scattered over all the shelves, and across his desk. There was dirty laundry piled on the floor. As Midoriya had not expected anyone to be in his bedroom anytime soon, Kirishima excluded. Midoriya didn't quite care what state his room was in when Kirishima was over anymore. All 3 teens sat on the floor, continuing to eat the snacks that Inko had given them. So, Katsuki, Kirishima said, stretching out the end of Bakugo's name. Does this mean we're boyfriends now? Bakugo froze, his half-eaten cookie just sitting in his hand forgotten as he looked up at Kirishima wide-eyed. Okay with that? Even though you and Deku are already together? He said, fully in shock. Of course we are. Why do you think I called you my boyfriend earlier? Midoriya added with a giggle. For the next few hours, Kirishima, Midoriya, and Bakugo all sat together, talking. Midoriya and Kirishima had insisted on Bakugo playing the music, which he had reluctantly agreed to. They ended up mostly talking and catching up. They had been in school together for a whole semester now, but before now they had been more of acquaintances or whatever the hell was going on between Midoriya and Bakugo rather than close friends or anything of the sort. Then, they discussed boundaries, since Bakugo was new to the relationship. Then, there was the conversation Bakugo was dreading most. Katsuki, I think we need to talk about it, Kirishima said. Despite not saying what it was, everyone in the room knew what he was talking about, not that Bakugo was going to willingly admit that. No, we don't. I don't know what you're talking about, he responded, his voice heavy with resistance and reluctance. Can you tell us, why specifically you don't want to talk about it? Bakugo just stared at Kirishima silently, refusing to respond. Because I'm scared you won't care. Because I'm scared I'm too far gone for anyone to even help me. Because trying to get better and failing is so much harder and more pathetic than never changing. Because I'm scared it will make you hate me. Because I'm scared you guys will think now that we're together I can just quit. Because I'm scared that if you guys see that's not true, you'll leave and I'll be alone again. 'Cause it makes me look weak, that all of this makes me look weak, he thought. But admitting that out loud would just make him seem even weaker, so of course, he wasn't going to do that. When Kirishima saw that Bakugo wasn't going to respond, he continued speaking, we know it's gonna be hard for you to get better, and that it's not gonna happen overnight. We just want to do the best we can to help you through it, and we can't do that without talking about it. I can handle it on my own, Bakugo retorted. We believe you, Kaken, Izuku said. He did not believe him. If he could handle it on his own, it wouldn't have gotten this bad in the first place. But Midoriya knew that telling Bakugo that wouldn't do anyone any favors. We just know it will be easier if we're there to help. And we want to do that for you. Whatever you say, Demon Nerd. The room went quiet again, and Bakugo started fidgeting with the discomfort of the practically soundless room. Are you okay with me asking some questions? Kirishima asked, breaking the silence. Fine, whatever, Bakugo mumbled. Midoriya scooted closer to him, grabbing his hand and beginning to rub comforting circles on the palm with his thumb. Bakugo had nearly pulled his hand away from Midoriya's grasp, still afraid though he would never admit it of letting himself be so close to the boy. Seeing that Bakugo seemed comfortable, or as comfortable as he was going to get, Kirishima proceeded to begin asking a few questions. But Do you think you began? He asked. I don't remember the first time. I think it might have been for control. Or just to feel something. My parents didn't help anything either, obviously. At least my dad didn't make it worse for the most part. One guess. How about any specific triggers you have, so we can avoid those? If I screw something up. Or if people think I'm weak. Or if I find a new blade. Or, Bakugo's voice trailed off. Take your time, Midoriya whispered, still caressing Bakugo's hand in his own. Stuff, just things that remind me of dash, Bakugo tried saying, but he seemed unable to make a whole sentence out. Things that remind you of what? Kirishima asked gently. Maybe later. Don't wanna, Bakugo mumbled out, barely audible. Okay, Kaken, that's okay, Midoriya said, trying to comfort him and get him to calm back down. Kirishima scooted over to where Bakugo sat saying, no more questions for now, okay? I know that was hard for you. Thank you for telling us what you can. Please pick up, Inko mumbled to herself as the phone rang. Honey, it's like 2 a.m. here, what's going on? A voice from the other side said. Sorry for calling you so late, Hisashi, I just really needed to talk to you. Did something happen? You remember Izuku's soulmate was struggling with self-harm, right? Yeah. And you remember that Izuku found his soulmate, but that wasn't the soulmate who was struggling with self-harm. Yeah. Did he find his other soulmate? Why? You probably won't remember him, but it's Mitsuki and Masaru's kid. What do I do? Mitsuki and Masaru know, but they're obviously not trying to help him get better if Izuku's trailing the flowers all over the place nearly every single day. I don't know what you can do in this situation. I can't believe that Mitsuki and Masaru know and are acting like they don't care. You should check that they really do know, and if they do, the least you can do is be there for him and support him in place of his own parents. Thank you, honey. You're welcome. I miss you and love you. I miss you and love you too. I hope you can get some more sleep. Hey guys. Bakugo said. Both Kirishima and Midoriya paused to see what Bakugo needed. I'm getting kinda tired. I'll go grab some extra blankets and pillows then, Midoriya said, jumping up and running out of his room. When he returned, arms filled to the brim with a comforter and a pile of pillows, he continued, one of you two can take the bed. Kirishima insisted that Bakugo take the bed, wanting him to get the best sleep he could, but Bakugo kept refusing. Judging by the deep purple shadowing underneath Bakugo's eyes, he needed whatever sleep he could get, and Kirishima knew that he had the best chance of getting the best sleep he could in a real bed. He usually liked how stubborn Bakugo was. It was a big part of his personality that Kirishima would never want to get rid of, but in moments like these, it was honestly more difficult than it was endearing. He just wanted to do anything he could to ensure Bakugo would be okay, but Bakugo was not cooperating, whether that was just due to his pride, or whether it was something else. Listen, idiot, Bakugo snapped, interrupting Kirishima. I don't want to be all alone on the effing bed while you two get lovey-dovey together on the floor. Bakugo sat down onto the pile of blankets and continued saying, please just don't make me take the bed, please. His voice was much more pleading than he would have liked. That's why he was being so stubborn. He didn't want to be alone. Is it okay if I sleep on the floor too then? Kirishima asked. Whatever, Bakugo mumbled back. Please do, he thought. Please don't make me stay alone. Bakugo stood up, helping shift around the pillows and blankets until there was enough room for 3 people rather than 2, and then immediately flopped back onto the homemade pallet as soon as it was finished. With a sigh, Bakugo's eyes fell shut, but then he felt movement behind him. He could tell by the person's build that it was Kirishima, trying to lay up against him. As Kirishima scooted forward, pressing his torso against Bakugo's back, Bakugo flinched away, causing a look of concern to immediately cross Kirishima's face. He hadn't meant to flinch, but it wasn't a voluntary motion, so it's not like it was his fault. Even if he hadn't meant to, he knew he couldn't hide it. He knew Kirishima had noticed, and maybe Midoriya too, and he really didn't want to have to admit to anything of that sort. Midoriya had seen, and quickly spoke up. Kaken. Is there any reason you do that whenever we touch you? He was quiet for a moment, as if he was thinking of how to respond, or how to avoid responding altogether. My mom would hit me sometimes when I was younger. Not hard or anything, and she doesn't anymore, so it's not that big a deal. I think now. I'm mostly just not used to it. Kirishima was the next to speak, saying, "Would you be more comfortable if we didn't yak now? Cuddle?" But the moment the words left Kirishima's mouth, Bakugo frantically shook his head. "We'll just go slow then," Midoriya said, laying down on the pallet on Bakugo's other side, making sure to leave some space between them to help Bakugo feel more comfortable. Kirishima slowly reached out, gently pressing a hand against Bakugo's back. Everyone could tell Bakugo was struggling to not pull away from Kirishima's touch, but still, he didn't move. "You're really tense," Kirishima whispered. He began to rub his hand in slow circles, trying to work out some of the tension, watching as Bakugo took slow, shaky breaths. Kirishima's hand slowly shifted down, gently holding his waist and scooting towards Bakugo, beginning to spoon him. Bakugo didn't say anything in response, but he did reach out, grabbing Midoriya and pulling him into his chest, turning himself into the middle spoon. I'm sorry I made it so hard for you guys to find me, and the flowers probably worried you a lot," Bakugo said in choked-out whispers. Hey, don't apologize for that," Kirishima responded. "We're just glad you're here now and we can help you from now on." The fabric of Bakugo's shirt rustled as Kirishima began moving his hand again, this time up and down Bakugo's torso. With each movement of his hand that was just a little bit too quick, Bakugo either sharply inhaled or flinched away from the touch. "Do you want me to stop?" Kirishima asked, concerned by his partner's reactions. Bakugo quickly shook his head and then responded, his voice barely a whisper. "No, don't. I'm not meaning to flinch, I promise. I'm just not used to being touched at all." Though he couldn't say it out loud, Bakugo really loved Kirishima petting him and Midoriya laying in his arms, even though he did involuntarily flinch a lot from it. With each movement of Kirishima's hand, and with each time Midoriya turned over in his arms, he felt electric tingles shooting up and down his whole body. He wished that this moment would never end. Lifting his arm from Midoriya's torso, Bakugo reached out, placing his arm back down in a slightly different location, now with his hand resting over Midoriya's. Letting out a small smile, Midoriya took Bakugo's hand in his own, giving it a small squeeze and then proceeding to rub small circles with his thumb. Each movement against his skin made Bakugo so happy, like someone actually cared about him, that he had to restrain himself from crying. If he cried, then he would definitely seem weak. If he cried, Kirishima would start thinking about how much of an unmanly boyfriend he had. If he cried, Kirishima would stop petting him. If he cried, Midoriya would stop rubbing his thumb in circles over Bakugo's palm. Midoriya would scoot away from him and he would be all alone. "Hey, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" Kirishima asked, his tone soft and caring as he pulled away from Bakugo just far enough that he could see the other boy's face. "I'm not crying," Bakugo mumbled back, turning his face into the pillow to hide the tears that definitely were not there. Midoriya rolled over, separating himself from Bakugo's arms and instead facing the boy. Gently and nearly even hesitantly, Midoriya set his hand over Bakugo's cheek. "Kaken," Midoriya whispered, "please tell us what's wrong. Did we accidentally hurt you? Are you okay?" Bakugo just shook his head, trying his best to respond, despite his voice being barely audible through the pillow. It's just all so much. I don't want this to end," he finally choked out, breaking down into sobs. "It doesn't have to end," Kirishima said. "We can do this whenever you want now." Kirishima's arm resumed its position against Bakugo's side, pulling Bakugo back into his chest even tighter than before. Bakugo sighed into Kirishima's strong grasp, letting himself sink into the pallet and into the other boy's arms. Then, Bakugo pulled Midoriya back into his chest, wrapping his arms around Midoriya's back. When he finally slept, he felt more safe and protected than he had before in his entire life. When Bakugo awoke, his back was pressed fully into Kirishima's chest, and his arms were wrapped fully around Midoriya, holding the boy tight into his own chest, similar to what Kirishima had done to him. It seemed that he was the only one awake, and he knew if he got up he would most definitely wake up at least one of the other boys, so instead he just laid silently, doing his best to not move at all. There was just a slight bit of light filtering into the room through the half-closed blinds, and Bakugo guessed that the sun had just recently started rising. They hadn't hurt so bad last night. Likely the actual damage he'd done hadn't quite registered, but now, his sides and thighs hurt like hell. The burning sensation was unpleasant at best and borderline unbearable at worst. He would say he's had worse, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized he probably hadn't had worse all at the same time as it was this time. Next to him, he felt Midoriya begin shifting in his arms. The boy turned over without opening his eyes and buried his face into Bakugo's chest rather than being spooned. "You awake?" Bakugo whispered. "No," Midoriya said back with a grumble. "You still want more sleep then, nerd?" Midoriya hummed out, and Bakugo couldn't tell if it was more of a half-awake groan or a hum of, "I'm thinking." "No, just cuddles," he eventually responded, patting around until he found Bakugo's hand, and then interlaced their fingers together. Bakugo wrapped his free arm back around Midoriya, pressing firmly onto his back, and then let his eyes fall back shut, curling his head forward, pressing his face to the top of Midoriya's head. The next time Bakugo awoke it was with a yell. "Sheet!" he yelled, waking up Midoriya, who until then had still been curled into his chest. He quickly sat up, pulling himself away from both Kirishima and Midoriya. He looked around, realizing that Kirishima had awoken, and accidentally bumped his thigh. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you," Bakugo just mumbled. "What happened, cats?" Kirishima asked, trying to reach out for Bakugo's hand, just to be shooed away. "It's nothing," Bakugo responded. He knew it was because Kirishima had accidentally hit the injuries on his leg, but he also knew if he said anything it would make Kirishima feel bad. So he stayed silent. Close to half an hour later, Kirishima had gotten up to go to the restroom and get ready, whereas Midoriya and Bakugo stayed in bed, trying to get a bit more rest. "Deku," Bakugo whispered. He snaked his hand down under the sheets, firmly placing it over Midoriya's thigh. With how close they were, he could practically feel Midoriya's heart rate increase with anxiety. "It was you, wasn't it?" was all he said. "Don't tell Aijiro, please." "He doesn't know I've ever done it," Midoriya said, his voice coming out in a desperate, practically whined whisper. "It's been less than a week, and from the flowers, I doubt they're healed yet. Let me bandage you up if you haven't, and I won't tell him about this time." "This time? If you do it again, I'm telling him. Immediately." "Thank you." When Kirishima returned to the room, Midoriya said he should go ahead and get some food and that he and Bakugo would be down in a minute, to which Kirishima complied. In the bathroom, Midoriya sat on the closed toilet lid, and Bakugo knelt on the floor in front of him, a reverse of the previous night. Once Bakugo's hands had been cleaned, he pressed 2 fingers to the skin directly next to Midoriya's cuts. "What are you doing?" Midoriya asked, slightly flinching away from Bakugo's fingers. "Making sure you don't have an infection, dumbass." Bakugo placed his fingers on the opposite thigh, just to make sure for reference that the injuries were not abnormally warm or anything of the sort, which they weren't. Bakugo quickly sprayed the leg with disinfectant, spread Neosporin over Midoriya's leg, and placed a large band-aid over the injuries. "Was it because of me?" Bakugo hesitantly asked as the 2 boys got dressed. "Being fully honest, no, not for the most part. I'd thought about it before you started. And if you hadn't, I think I would have done it myself instead, a long time ago. Just over the past few weeks, those thoughts have been coming back, and they did get worse when you were doing it. I just took advantage of Aijiro not being able to find out if I did it right then. I'm sorry if I've been making that worse." "It's not your fault," Midoriya responded, grabbing Bakugo's hand and squeezing as he guided him out of the bedroom and towards the kitchen. "Kaken, do you think we could talk to Mr. Aizawa about your issue?" Midoriya asked as they walked to school together. "No," Bakugo's response was short and curt, trying to leave no room for debate. "I think he'll be able to help you, and help us help you. Please." Bakugo zoned out, fully ignoring the question, whether that was purposeful or not. It wasn't like he was going to inconvenience Inko by asking if she could drive them even though he knew she would agree in a heartbeat. Despite that, he knew it hadn't been a good idea for them to walk as his legs already felt like they were on fire when they were still only halfway to school. Cats? Earth to cats? Katsuki? Kirishima said, waving a hand in front of Bakugo's face until he noticed he was being spoken to. What's up? You just stopped walking. Nothing, Bakugo said, taking another step forward, unable to hide his wince this time. Kat, you should have told us if it hurts that bad, Kirishima said. We could have driven. Not a big deal, Bakugo mumbled, taking another short step with another wince. Kirishima rushed ahead and crouched down in front of Bakugo. Piggyback ride? He said questioningly. Bakugo would have tried refusing, but he could tell he wasn't going to make it to school in time at this rate unless he agreed. Begrudgingly, he accepted the offer, allowing Kirishima to carry him the last few blocks to the school, but still getting off before any of their classmates had a chance to see him. After school, Midoriya stayed behind in the classroom, waiting for the rest of his peers to leave. Kirishima and Bakugo, on the other hand, sat in the hall, waiting for Midoriya to complete speaking to Aizawa. What do you need? Aizawa asked, seeming mildly annoyed that he would not be able to go home yet. We need some advice, sir, Midoriya responded. We were wondering if you may know of any tips on helping someone recovering from self-harm? Who are you referring to, Midoriya? He asked, the mild annoyance he had previously had replaced fully by extreme concern now. Well, Ikakinsu. He's Aijiro and my third soulmate. His parents already know, so you don't need to report him, but Aijiro and I just didn't know who else to ask. Let's go sit down, Aizawa said, pulling an extra chair up to a desk, sitting down, and gesturing for Midoriya to do the same. Is it okay if I ask some questions? Midoriya nodded his head, so Aizawa proceeded. Is Bakugo in immediate danger? No, I don't believe so. I'm trying to get him to stay over at my house more. How long has this been going on? Close to 6 years. How is his support system? He has me, Aijiro, and my mom. He hasn't met her yet, but I'm sure Aijiro's mom will be there for him too. And his parents? They don't really care much. They're kinda going off, mental struggles don't exist, bullshit. What specific questions do you want me to answer? Should Aijiro and I take his blades? Midoriya asked hesitantly. This may surprise you, but I'm going to say no. Not unless he gives you permission. Though I would ask if he is okay with that, and if he is, then yes. Why would you say we shouldn't? It's more of a harm reduction tool. If he is going to do it no matter what, it is better that it be with something clean and familiar to prevent slip-ups. Though, I will say, if he does keep them, don't agree to letting him keep them on him. Midoriya nodded in response, and then continued speaking. We told him to come to us if he wants to do it, but when he does come to us, what do we even do? My recommendation would be to ask him whether he would like to talk about it, or be distracted from it, and go from there. Midoriya mumbled under his breath as Aizawa spoke, repeating the words back to himself as he tried memorizing them. Midoriya paused for a moment to think, and then spoke back up. What kind of other coping methods should he try, instead of self-harm? I don't think he's found any. At all. Instead of listing out things out loud and hoping Midoriya could remember them, Aizawa grabbed a paper and wrote out a list instead. Distractions. Music. Books. TV/movies. Talking. Play a board game or video game. Hobbies. Snapping RBB band. Drawing on skin. Journaling. Making art. Letting ice cube melt in hand. Putting ice cube and food dye where you want to harm yourself. Talking to people. Going on a walk. Exercise. Go somewhere where you don't have tools to harm yourself. SCK on sour candy to shock your brain. Anything else, kid? What about treating the actual cuts? Midoriya said, his voice barely a whisper as he finished the sentence. If it is, Aizawa paused, taking a deep breath, gaping, it will likely need stitches, or if the bleeding doesn't stop after 10 minutes of pressure. But, if you wait more than 12 to 24 hours, stitches are no longer an option. Sheet, Midoriya mumbled under his breath, too quiet for Aizawa to hear, as he remembered how long the injuries had been bleeding for the previous night, and how long ago that had already been. Noticing Midoriya's concerned face, Aizawa continued, if he did need stitches and it is too late, So long as the bleeding did stop and he didn't lose too much blood, not getting stitches just means that you need to be extra careful about infections, and the scar will be worse. Midoriya nodded along, fairly relieved that it was okay that Bakugo didn't get stitches. It is best to use a disinfectant, then neosporin and bandage with gauze, and the gauze must be changed every day. You got that? Midoriya nodded. If they're deeper than surface level, you need to be super careful of infections, so keep an eye out for the surrounding skin being warm, red, irritated, and on worse infections, possibly even an odor. Thank you, Mr. Aizawa, Midoriya said, beyond grateful for his help. Is there anything else I should know? From even just your being here, I assume this isn't the case, but relapses do happen, and when they do, you need to be patient. Bakugo is strong, but getting upset at him will do much more harm. On another note, you might want to get him some Vaseline. Once they're partially healed, it's going to itch like hell, and the Vaseline will help with that. Aizawa walked Midoriya to the door of the classroom, and Midoriya thanked Aizawa one more time. One last thing, he added, tell him he can call me too, in addition to you and Kirishima. I wrote my personal number on the paper. Katsuki, Kirishima whispered. School had ended close to 20 minutes ago, and the hallway was empty, except for Kirishima and Bakugo. They both sat to the side of the hallway, leaned against the wall and leaned against each other. It felt too awkward to speak fully out loud for some reason, when the school felt so empty. It was almost as if the emptiness of the large building was eating their noise. What? He said back, not whispering a single bit. You want to come over to my house today? Once Aiza's done talking to Mr. Aizawa, Bakugo just grumbled in response, letting his head fall onto Kirishima's shoulder, which Kirishima took as a yes. Close to 10 minutes later, Midoriya walked out of the classroom, still repeatedly thanking Aizawa. Can we finally leave? Bakugo asked. He was glad to have not had to speak to Mr. Aizawa himself, but he was still nowhere near pleased. Not yet, a voice said from the doorway. It was Mr. Aizawa. It'll only be a minute, but I want to talk to you, just for a second, Bakugo. Bakugo cursed under his breath as he pulled himself up off the ground. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, hiding how they shook, as he shuffled behind Aizawa, refusing to look up towards his teacher. It was hard to make his legs keep stepping forward, as it felt like he was walking towards his doom. His heart pounded in his head and in his fingertips, and it felt like he was going to puke any minute now. He just hoped Aizawa wouldn't notice the shake in his legs, in his hands, all over. In the classroom, Aizawa sat in the chair he had previously sat in when talking to Midoriya, but being stubborn, or maybe just being anxious, Bakugo sat on top of the desk adjacent instead. He already told me that your parents know, and that they are not so helpful. I'm not going to call them about this, just so you know. Bakugo just mumbled back a thank you. The room was starting to feel claustrophobic, like it was closing in on him, and Aizawa, like it was closing in on him. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to have this conversation. He didn't want Aizawa to know, he hadn't wanted Midoriya and Kirishima to know, he hadn't wanted his parents to know. He would be so much better off if no one knew at all. Then they wouldn't think he was weak. Then they wouldn't seem so worried all the time, be scared of touching him, and be scared to even leave him alone. Midoriya has a list of coping methods that you can try. And I want you to know, you can call me anytime if you need anything, no matter how late it is, Aizawa continued. My phone number is with Midoriya. Now, Aizawa sighed, obviously saddened that this must be asked in the first place. Do you have any fresh injuries? Bakugo froze. Why was Aizawa asking? Was he going to ask to see them? Would he send them to Recovery Girl? It's not a big deal, Bakugo responded. He found himself avoiding looking towards Aizawa, and instead distracting himself by staring intensely out the window. From what Midoriya said, it did sound like more than not a big deal, Aizawa corrected, thinking back to the discussion of stitches with the green-haired boy. I will not make you go to Recovery Girl, but if you would like to, we can do that. I don't want to. Have they been cleaned and bandaged? Deku and Ijiro did it for me. Would you be okay with me checking them? From what Midoriya said, I believe one of them should have had stitches. He didn't want Aizawa to see them. He would just think he was weak for doing it in the first place. He would think he was weak for not going deep enough, just like his mom did. Aizawa would be disgusted and not want to help him anymore. Can we not? Bakugo asked. Okay, kid, I'm not going to force you. Aizawa wasn't going to force him to show his injuries? Bakugo had said no, and Aizawa had just agreed to that, without any further argument. Since it was deep enough to need stitches, it's much more infection-prone. I need you to be very careful to not get an infection, and if you do start seeing symptoms, warm or inflamed skin surrounding it, pus, and if it's really bad, a fever, I need you to tell me. Immediately. This one isn't up for debate. And thank you, Bakugo mumbled, nearly too embarrassed to say the second half. Are you going to be okay walking to my house? Kirishima asked. I can call my mom to drive. It's not a fucking big deal, I can walk just fine, Bakugo snapped back, already walking ahead of both of his boyfriends, and out of the front door of the school. When they arrived at Kirishima's house, Kirishima's mother was sitting in the living room, rewatching one of her favorite movies, and crocheting a baby blanket for some family friend. Mama, can Izuku and Katsuki please stay over tonight? Kirishima asked. Katsuki as in your hot friend from school Katsuki? She asked. Bakugo's face turned bright red, and Kirishima's face turned even redder. Mama, you can't say that. He can hear you, Kirishima yelped. So yes, your friend Katsuki, who happens to be hot then? She continued with a smirk. Kirishima loved his mother, but sometimes she could be so infuriatingly embarrassing, and he knew she was doing it purposefully. Actually, boyfriend Katsuki, who is pretty hot, Kirishima mumbled. Bakugo stepped forward, standing next to Kirishima, and gently hit him with the side of the foot, trying to get him to stop. If Kirishima kept saying stuff like that, Bakugo would turn so pink that he might actually combust. Kirishima's mother's eyes went wide, and she whispered, "Boyfriend?" She immediately stood up and walked over to Bakugo, gently wrapping her arms around him. The first time Bakugo did this, with Inko, he had been tense and freaked out, but this time was different. This time, he let himself sink into the warmth of her hug practically immediately. It's okay. It'll be okay, Kurino, she whispered. Kirishima was about to get onto his mother, assuming that Bakugo was uncomfortable. He never seemed to like being held so long, other than the previous night, when he had initiated it himself. To Kirishima's surprise, Bakugo lifted his arms, slowly wrapping them around Kirishima's mother's back, returning her hug, so he decided to not step in. Kirishima's bedroom was quite different from Midoriya's. There were obviously a few Red Riot posters scattered around, mostly just on the ceiling, but for the most part, his walls didn't seem to reflect his interests. Also, his room seemed much cleaner, with many fewer dishes and much less laundry. In the bedroom, Bakugo was the first to speak up. Your mom already knows who I am? And you described me to your mom as... Bakugo's voice faded off as the tops of his ears and cheeks began to heat up again. Well, sorry? Kirishima responded. Ijiro here had a bit of a crush on you before we knew you were our soulmate, Midoriya explained, laughing at Kirishima with how much embarrassment was showing on his face. Really? Bakugo asked, his eyes going wide in shock. Really? Kirishima confirmed. Bakugo was spending the night at Midoriya's house, as he had been doing for many nights now. It seemed that he only ever went to his house to get clothes and things he needed, but rarely actually stayed there anymore. It was partially because he didn't want to be home and his boyfriends always offered for him to stay over, but also partially because Midoriya and Kirishima didn't want him to be alone, much less be alone with his parents. This specific night, it was just Midoriya and Bakugo. They had already eaten dinner, and it was close to 11 p.m. Since it was only the two of them, they were both able to fit in the bed. Bakugo was already in bed, and when Midoriya walked out of the bathroom and towards him, he immediately started laughing. Are those dinosaur boxers? He asked. Laugh all you want, but you know I look fantastic in these, Midoriya said, lifting his shirt, Kirishima's shirt, and hitting his leg, showing off the multicolored dinosaurs scattered across a dark blue background. Midoriya's hand rested on his leg, fingers just centimeters away from his own scars. They were still red dark pink and hadn't yet turned into bumps protruding from his skin, but they were fully healed, and for that, Bakugo was thankful. He smiled at Midoriya and pushed away the painful thought of his boyfriend being covered in scars like his. It's hard to take you seriously when you're wearing dinosaur boxers and a shark t-shirt, Bakugo said. You're dressed like a 7-year-old. I know you still like me all the same, Midoriya said, climbing into the bed next to Bakugo. Midoriya wrapped his arms around Bakugo, who was dressed much more modestly, wearing a plain tank top with full-length breaths. He knew Midoriya had already seen his scars countless times, and he knew Midoriya's opinion of him would never change. Despite that, a little part of his brain still insisted that if Midoriya saw him struggling, if Midoriya saw proof that he used to struggle, he would think he was weak. Or, Midoriya would not want to be with him anymore. We should go get you some real pajama breathes, Midoriya whispered. So you don't have to sleep in these things anymore. He put a hand onto Bakugo's breathes, feeling the dense texture of the breathes. They seemed cozy enough, but any breathes with belt loops, a zipper and a button were definitely not meant to be slept in. The two boys laid together in bed, too tired to do anything else that night, but not quite tired enough to sleep. Midoriya's hands gently skimmed over Bakugo's bare skin. His arms were covered in scars too, like his sides and thighs, but these ones didn't bother him so much. Most of the scars on his arms were from training or something of the sort, so he didn't mind them nearly as much as the others. Those scars were proof of how hard he trained, and how he would become a hero one day. I've always wondered, Midoriya whispered. How'd you get this one? Midoriya asked. His fingers. Skimmed his fingers over the scar diagonal across his bicep. The scar he had gotten while Midoriya and Kirishima were out getting boba. I didn't do it myself, Bakugo responded. He was usually hesitant to talk about his self-harm, but this seemed even more hesitant than that. It seemed different. Was it training? Midoriya asked, just hoping for the best, even though he could tell it wasn't. My mom, she never really hit me. Like, she'd kinda thwack me sometimes, that sort of thing. She only hit me for real when she was really mad. Midoriya was silent. The last time she really hit me, she was cooking soup. I think other times she'd hit me, she'd use whatever was in her hands, a hairbrush, spoon, book. She didn't realize she was holding a knife. Kaken, I'm so sorry. That was the only time she really apologized to me. And she hasn't hit me once since. I had to get 12 stitches. Bakugo felt tears begin dripping down his face. When he first got together with Midoriya and Kirishima, he would have tried to hide it, but now he just laid there and let himself cry. Midoriya's hands rested on Bakugo's face, carefully wiping away the tears with his hands. Sorry, I know you didn't ask for a trauma dump right now. I asked, 'cause I wanted to know. You have nothing to apologize for. When Midoriya said that, Bakugo began crying harder, mumbling more inaudible apologies. It's okay, just get it all out, Midoriya whispered, holding the boy tight to his chest as sobs racked his body. Once he had calmed down, Bakugo spoke again. Your mom's really nice, isn't she? He whispered. I guess we all have to have one shitty parent. Is your dad okay then? Midoriya whispered back. He tries his best. And yours? When he's home, he's good, Midoriya's voice trailed off. But I haven't even seen him in person for 4 years now. He'll pick up the phone if mom calls, but he never calls us either. Not even for birthdays or Christmas. Sounds like a bit of a dash, Bakugo mumbled. What about Ei's dad? I've never heard about him at all. Eijiro never met him. I'm pretty sure he just left before he was even born. Well, that's a shitbag move right there. At least we have 3 decent parents between us, I guess. Yeah, at least we have that. Are you awake? Bakugo whispered. Midoriya shifted next to him, mumbling a small, mostly, back to him. I know it's a bad time, but Bakugo went silent, not sure how to say it. Is it? Do you want to hurt yourself? Midoriya whispered back, noticing Bakugo's mood. Bakugo nodded. Do you want a distraction? Or I can go grab the list Aizawa made, Midoriya said frantically. Just hold me. Please. Midoriya nodded, sitting up and pulling the boy into his arms. Bakugo seemed nearly limp when Midoriya moved him, fully pliant as he sunk into his boyfriend's chest. Midoriya's arms gently wrapped around Bakugo's back. Tighter, Bakugo whispered. Just hold me so tight that I can't move. As tight as you can. So I can't run. And so I can't think of anything else. Okay, Kakin, Midoriya whispered back, tightening his grip around his boyfriend. And Bakugo held on tight back. If he let go, he might try to run, so he held on tighter. Do you want to talk about it? He asked. Not now. Later, he mumbled. Bakugo tried apologizing. For what, he didn't know, but he tried anyway. He was just met by shus from Midoriya, trying to tell him to not apologize, that he had nothing to apologize for. They held each other for what felt like hours, until they were both so tired that they could barely keep on holding each other. Bakugo's grip began to falter as he began dozing off, but no matter how tired Midoriya got, he did not let go of his boyfriend. When they woke up the next morning, Midoriya was still holding Bakugo just as tight as he had been the previous night, even through his sleep. Once they had both awoken, Midoriya carefully asked, "Do you want to talk about it now?" With a nod, Bakugo began speaking. I don't know why it happened then, I was honestly scared of what I might have done, if I hadn't woken you up. Was it self-harm or something else? Midoriya asked. Self-harm. But worse than usual, like I kept on thinking I had to go deeper, and that I had to do it somewhere more visible or else none of it's actually real. Or else I'm not sick enough to get help. I'm glad you woke me up, Kakin. Thank you. Back staying at Kirishima's house, both Kirishima and Bakugo had woken up much too early to actually get out of bed, especially since it was a weekend, but they both knew they stood no chance of falling back asleep. Tell me more about Mur and Rei, Bakugo said, breaking the silence. Really? Kirishima said excitedly, immediately pulling himself up to a sitting position. He really enjoyed sharing stories he had made himself, but sometimes got worried that others didn't feel the same or didn't want to listen to them, so he rarely shared them without being asked. And I'm sitting in your lap now, Bakugo added, placing himself on top of Kirishima's legs, leaning back into Kirishima's chest, and holding his boyfriend's hands together in front of his stomach as Kirishima continued telling the story. The second gravestone he told Mur about was Harriet. She had been Rei's grandmother, Caitlin's mom. When Rei was young, Caitlin and Harriet would always play a duet together when Rei or any of his siblings couldn't sleep, Caitlin on the violin and Harriet on the piano. When Caitlin had died, Harriet began teaching Raymond how to play the violin part of the duet. Now that Raymond had died, the violin was the only thing he could still touch without falling straight through it. Raymond had never been able to play the duet with Harriet. Before he had completed learning the full song on violin, Harriet had fallen ill with scarlet fever and passed. The third and fourth gravestone he spoke of was Bessie's and Abe's. Bessie, as Mur learned, was Raymond's younger sister, and Abe, full name Abraham, was Raymond's younger brother, Raymond being the oldest, Bessie being the middle child, and Abe being the youngest. Bessie had been born just 2 years after Raymond, and barely even remembered Caitlin. Abe, on the other hand, had been born even later and couldn't remember his own mother at all. Being the oldest, Raymond had much responsibility to take care of his siblings. Bessie and Abe both loved hearing stories of their mother, or fictional stories Rei would make up before bed. Soon after Harriet passed, Bessie did as well. At the time, Harriet, Rei, Bessie, Abe, and his father had been living together. Rei's father had evaded getting the fever by leaving the house. Rei, on the other hand, had no clue how he had evaded getting sick, as Harriet, Bessie, and Abe all had. Cats, I can't feel my legs, Kirishima said, carefully pushing Bakugo off his thighs. Bakugo shifted, patting his lap for Kirishima to sit there instead of the other way around. This time, they faced each other and Kirishima's legs were wrapped around Bakugo's back as he continued the story. Harriet passed after just 3 days of showing symptoms, and Bessie passed the next. Abe, on the other hand, had stayed sick for the next week, but with Raymond taking care of him, he was able to recover. When Abe was sick and Edmund, their father, had gone off who knows where, Raymond, at the age of 13, had dug the graves for both his sister and grandmother and buried them. As Abe recovered his health and learned of what happened to Bessie and Harriet, he began having nightmares which just got worse when Edmund came back. It had taken months of talking to Raymond for him to even begin talking about his father. From what Mer had gathered, he wasn't a good man. Even though it was more typical for the time, for Ray's time, for parents to hit their kids, that didn't make it okay. In addition, from how Ray seemed to talk about Edmund, it sounded possibly more extreme. As a younger kid, Ray had taken the blame with Edmund many times to protect Bessie and Abe, but now that it was just Edmund, Ray, and Abe, Raymond was no longer able to distract his father with his brother. Raymond was still only 13 and Abe was 8, and the toll his father's treatment was taking on him was becoming more and more visible. Each night, Raymond and Abe would lay together, Abe crying his eyes out into Raymond's chest, and Ray laying silently, just holding his little brother. He was struggling and wanted to cry just as much as Abe, but as the big brother, he had to stay strong. Time passed, and Abe began saying how he didn't know how much longer he could take this. That obviously worried Ray, but he didn't know what else he could even do. Whenever Mer would ask how Abe, Edmund, or Raymond himself had died, Ray would refuse to talk anymore about that portion of his past. Instead, Mer insisted that they would learn the piano piece of Harriet and Caitlin's duet. "It gets darker, so I'm gonna wait till later for the rest if that's okay," Kirishima said. "Thanch'm," Bakugo mumbled back. Still not ready to get up, the two boys just sat in silence together. Kirishima traced his hands over Bakugo's back. His hands slid up underneath Bakugo's shirt, not platonically, yet not sexually either. Skimming over the soft skin, Kirishima's hands accidentally floated to Bakugo's sides. "Sorry," he mumbled, shifting his hands away from the scarred skin. "It's okay. I don't mind if you don't," Bakugo whispered, gently guiding Kirishima's hands back to his sides. Kirishima's hands traced over the bumpy skin, much more hesitant than he had been on Bakugo's back. In a way, he was thankful for Bakugo's scars, because they were scars rather than the cuts they had been, and they proved he was getting better. Even if he may still have more slip-ups, they proved he had survived. "Sometimes, people act like they're not there, which can be nice," Bakugo whispered, setting his hand on top of Kirishima's, "but sometimes it's nice to be reminded. If they weren't there, that would mean none of the bad stuff ever happened. When people ignore them, sometimes, it makes me feel like that's 'cause there's not enough scars. So, recognizing the scars. It recognizes the bad stuff, but it also recognizes you getting better," Kirishima whispered. "Exactly. I'm glad," Kirishima whispered. His hands continued skimming over Bakugo's soft skin, over scars and over scarless skin, over defined muscles. "I'm glad you're getting better. I'm glad that you're getting more comfortable in your own body. I'm glad you're here with us now." Bakugo was home, just for one night, as he had been doing once a week or so, 'cause it wasn't like he could just move out of his house and never see his parents again. Midoriya didn't know what was wrong with him, but he just couldn't stop himself from spiraling. He couldn't call Kirishima, he just couldn't tell Kirishima he was still thinking about harming himself. And he definitely couldn't tell Kirishima that he had done it before, and he was about to do it again. Like blade already in hand and breathes pulled down about to do it again. It wasn't like he could call Bakugo either. Bakugo needed his sleep, and with his mental state, Midoriya didn't want to put this on Bakugo. Before he even had a chance to think of the consequences, his legs were covered in angry red marks. It felt like his legs were burning and Midoriya couldn't stop crying because he couldn't believe how badly it hurt. He couldn't believe how long Bakugo had stood this pain, because the damage to Midoriya's legs right now wasn't even close to a fraction of what Bakugo had done to himself over just the past year. He sobbed, the tears would not stop, and Midoriya couldn't breathe. His phone dinged, and he could see a message from Bakugo. "I'm coming over," was all it said. 10 minutes later, Midoriya's bedroom door quietly opened, and Bakugo stepped in, shutting the door behind him. "I locked your front door behind me. You should really lock that before you go to bed," Bakugo said. He knew it was just because Inko was working a night shift, and she frequently forgot her keys, but saying that was much easier than talking about why he was there in the first place. "What happened?" "I just couldn't stop thinking." Bakugo sat down next to Midoriya, pulling a first aid kit and a pile of already stained washcloths from his bag and pressing them down onto Midoriya's thighs, trying to soak the blood. "It hurts," Midoriya rasped, trying to hold back his tears and not succeeding as they fell down his face, caressing his cheeks. "Please, stop, it hurts," he cried. "Bear with me, Izuku. Trust me, It'll hurt a lot worse if you get an infection. I'm trying, but it hurts so bad, he sputtered out as Bakugo added an extra layer of cloth, continuing to put pressure on the wounds. Bakugo lifted one hand to Midoriya's face, wiping away the tears and brushing the hair from his eyes. You're strong, you'll be okay. It'll be over soon, he whispered. When Midoriya's legs were covered in gauze, and both boys were comfortably wrapped in a blanket, Bakugo spoke again. I was up, he said. You should have called me. I'm sorry. Midoriya leaned over, letting himself lay in Bakugo's lap. Bakugo ran his fingers through Midoriya's curly hair. Aijiro needs to know about this, Bakugo said. It's happened 2 times now, and he still doesn't know that you've ever done this. Midoriya tensed in Bakugo's lap. I can't do it. I can't tell him. I'm not saying you have to tell him today, tomorrow, but you can't keep it from him forever. What do I tell him tomorrow? He'll still see the flowers, Midoriya asked. I'll cover for you, Bakugo said, even if it was against his better judgment. He remembered the last time this had happened, and he had said if it ever happened again, he would go tell Kirishima, but here he was, doing the exact opposite. Bakugo continued, but you need to call me next time you feel like this, and you need to tell him eventually. Thank you, Kaken, Midoriya whispered, nuzzling his head into Bakugo's hand and shutting his eyes trying to get some sleep. At 6 a.m., Midoriya was asleep in Bakugo's lap, and Bakugo's phone began ringing. Hey Aijiro, Bakugo said, picking up the phone. Are you okay? What happened? Oh right. I'm with Izuku now. He already bandaged me up. And what happened? Bakugo was silent for a second as he tried to think of something to say. My mom was just yelling a lot again. Not at me, but she was in a bad mood and I couldn't deal with it. I'm okay now though. Are you sure? It looked like the flowers were. Kirishima paused, thinking about his phrasing. There were a lot of flowers. Like more than usual. Sheet, Bakugo thought. He'd forgotten about Midoriya being a bit heavier-handed than he was. Really? I didn't notice, Bakugo said, trying to bullshit his way out of the situation. I must have just been extra tired or something. Be careful. Please. Midoriya woke up just as Bakugo was saying bye to Kirishima. Did you tell him? Midoriya whispered. Bakugo shook his head. I said I'd cover for you. I wouldn't tell him without letting you know before at the very least. Midoriya just hummed a thanks. Do you need to go into school late today? Midoriya shook his head, pulling himself up from Bakugo's lap where he had slept the previous night. 15 minutes later, they were both on their way to school. When they arrived, Kirishima immediately gave Bakugo a giant hug and squeezed Midoriya's hand, whispering a thank you for taking care of Bakugo, even though it should have been the other way around. Bakugo eyed Midoriya cautiously the whole day, practically monitoring his each and every move and reading into the lines way too much. Each time Kirishima grabbed Midoriya's thigh that day, a habit that Midoriya and Bakugo both hated at the moment, Bakugo could see Midoriya trying to hide his flinch. It took everything in him to not tell, get Kirishima to give Midoriya a hug instead of himself, and to get Kirishima to stop squeezing right over Midoriya's injuries. With how much Midoriya had cried the previous night about how bad it hurt, Bakugo couldn't imagine how much restraint it was taking to show such minimal reactions to Kirishima's movement. It also seemed near impossible that none of Midoriya's injuries would reopen from it. When they got home, Bakugo was proven right, as he removed the bloody bandages and replaced them with fresh ones. Midoriya could not be more thankful that Kirishima had not noticed the petals falling from his own breathes or the ones from Bakugo's. I'm sorry about this, Midoriya mumbled. You're already dealing with enough on your own dash, he began rambling. We all deal with bullshit sometime or another. You help me with mine, I help you with yours. No apologies. Thank you then. For helping me. Bakugo just nodded, pulling Midoriya into his arms. He ran his fingers through Midoriya's hair, and brushed his thumbs over Midoriya's cheeks. You have more freckles than when you were little, he said. They look weird, don't they? Midoriya mumbled. His self-esteem had obviously taken a hit with this most recent breakdown. Nah, they make you cute as shit, Bakugo said, nuzzling his nose against Midoriya's, then placing a few pecks on his cheeks, on some of the more prominent freckles. Midoriya's face was engulfed in heat as his cheeks and the tops of his ears turned bright red. "Quit it," Midoriya whined, pushing Bakugo away from him from embarrassment. "Quit what?" Bakugo said with a laugh. "You want me to quit this?" he asked, peppering his face with even more kisses. "Kaken, it's embarrassing," Midoriya said, hiding his face into Bakugo's chest. Bakugo just chuckled, running his hands through Midoriya's thick dark green hair, comfortingly rubbing the back of his head. The moment of embarrassment and laughing passed, and Midoriya began apologizing again. "I'm sorry that you had to end up with me as your soulmate," Midoriya whispered. "You would have been better off with just Kirishima and not me." "No, no, no," Bakugo said. "Look at me, Zuko. I am so happy to have you as my soulmate, and I wouldn't have it any other way." Bakugo lifted Midoriya's face up to meet him in the eyes. "Tiny freckles, giant mess of hair and all. You're sweet and caring and so incredibly appealing. I mean your eyes alone make me want to stare at you for hours." And then, Midoriya was giggling again. His ears and cheeks were covered in blush, but this time, he didn't quite mind. He knew he had to go home for more than just one night, getting home at 8 p.m. and leaving at 7 a.m. at some point. Bakugo couldn't just keep living at his boyfriend's houses. He could stay at his boyfriend's houses whenever he wanted without his parents caring, mostly because they didn't know where he was, but they might start to have a problem with it if he literally never came home. The first night home went just fine. There were no relapses, no incidents with Mitsuki, and they all met each other to walk to school together the next day, and the second day was the same. It wasn't until the third day that they ran into a problem. It was near 1 a.m. and Bakugo couldn't sleep, so he had begun cleaning his bedroom. He picked up piles of clothes from the floor, quietly brought all his dirty dishes down to the kitchen, and then began cleaning up his desk. He put a few books back onto the shelf, straightened out his papers, mostly various completed homeworks that had already been graded. When he picked up his journal, though, he heard a clink. There was a blade laying on his desk that had fallen out of the journal. It was an old one of his favorites from the time that he had quit using, solely because he had lost it. At least now he knew where it went. In a moment of adrenaline, he pulled off his shirt and quickly pulled it against his side. Damn it, I shouldn't have done that. Ijiro will know. Izuku will know. Everything froze. The panic subsided, and he couldn't feel anything anymore. Since I already did one, since they'll already find out anyway, I might as well do more. They probably won't want me alone for a while after this, so I won't have any more chances. He slid his breeds down to his knees and sat on the floor, with the blade in hand. He quickly dragged it across each of his thighs repeatedly, then across his sides and chest too. Each time, he tried to go just a bit deeper, each cut taking a second longer to turn from white to red than the last. Between the exhaustion and blood loss, Bakugo ended up passing out on the floor of his bedroom, a puddle of dark red surrounding his legs. When Midoriya awoke, something felt off. He laid in bed for a moment, then noticed something itching at his thighs. He lifted the covers to see a large pile of flowers, much larger than it had usually been, before Bakugo was trying to get clean. Midoriya immediately grabbed his phone off his nightstand and called Bakugo, but the call went to voicemail. He called 2 more times and the same happened, so he hopped out of bed, quickly throwing on his school uniform, writing a note for his mother, grabbing his school bag and running out his front door. It took him 5 minutes to reach Bakugo's household. He was about to knock on the front door, but once he realized that Mitsuki and Masaru were probably home, he thought better of it. Walking around the side of the house, Midoriya made his way to Bakugo's window. He couldn't quite see inside, but he still knew which window it was. He tapped on the window, quiet at first, but every few seconds he would knock a bit louder. "Shut the F up," Bakugo yelled from inside. "Kaken, it's me. Open your diamond window," Midoriya yelled back. Midoriya couldn't hear what Bakugo said next, but he could tell it was some sort of series of curses. A few moments later, Izuku could hear the window creaking open, and then a grumble of "come in" coming from inside. Midoriya struggled to pull himself up, but once he got his arms over the windowsill, he was able to pull himself the rest of the way inside, only scraping up his knees on the brick a tiny bit. "It's 6:15 in the FING morning, Zuku," Bakugo mumbled, still nowhere near being truly awake. Flowers. There were so many flowers, Kaken. Midoriya began to cry as he stepped forward, pulling Bakugo into his embrace. Since it was still so early, the room was nearly fully dark. Midoriya couldn't see Bakugo's injuries, and he couldn't see the puddle of blood on the floor. He led Bakugo to the bed, having him lay down, and then sat down just next to him. "Tell me what happened?" Midoriya asked. "I was cleaning and found an old blade. I did it without thinking." "How much sleep did you get? You must have been up pretty late." "I dunno, like 3 hours or so?" "Let's get you back to bed for a bit before school then," Midoriya whispered, pulling the blankets over Bakugo. Midoriya knew he couldn't let himself fall asleep. He didn't want Bakugo's mom to see that he was here, so instead, Midoriya sat on the floor, holding Bakugo's hand, rubbing circles into his palm while he went back to sleep. The window was still open, and a gentle, comfortably warm breeze flowed through the room. The room was near silent, and all Midoriya could hear was the light rustling of trees outside the window and Bakugo's shallow breathing. Close to half an hour later, Bakugo's phone began ringing and Midoriya scrambled to grab it, hoping he could get it before it woke Bakugo up. When he picked up the phone, a photo of Kirishima and the contact name Shitty Hertz 3 flashed across the screen, so he quickly hit accept call. "Katsuki, what happened?" Kirishima frantically asked. "It's me," Izuku responded. "Kaken's asleep right now." "Is he okay?" "I haven't checked the injuries yet, and he didn't get much sleep, but he's safe. I'm pretty sure it was a little while ago, 'cause I had to wake him up by banging on the window." "Should I come over?" Kirishima asked. "No, I think it'll be okay. I don't want his parents to realize we're here. I'll call to keep you updated, okay? Just check his injuries for me, okay?" There were a lot of flowers. Midoriya agreed, saying he'd see Kirishima soon, and hung up. "Kaken," Midoriya whispered, gently shaking the boy's arm. "What?" He whined, stretching out the word. "You don't have to get up, you should keep napping if you want, but I need to check your injuries, okay?" Bakugo just grumbled in response, just hoping that Midoriya wouldn't turn the lights on too bright so that he could still rest a bit longer. Thankfully, Midoriya just turned on one lamp, not bright enough to hurt Bakugo's eyes, but still light enough to be able to see. Now with a bit more light, Midoriya could see the puddle of dried blood on the floor, but he knew it wasn't the time to worry about that. Midoriya carefully pulled the blankets down, revealing Bakugo's uncovered torso. Since he had just passed out on the floor and not woken up until Midoriya arrived, he had never had a chance to put his clothes back on. Midoriya's eyes scanned over the wounds covering Bakugo's torso. None of them seemed to be in need of stitches. The blood over them had dried into a rusty, flaking dark brown. He knew they needed to be cleaned, but he wasn't sure he could leave the room to get the supplies without running into Mitsuki. Midoriya moved the blanket to recover Bakugo's torso and proceeded to uncover his thighs. Midoriya stared for nearly a full minute, practically in shock. Blood still slowly seeped from some of the wounds it had even soaked onto the bed sheets, and they were worse than he had ever seen on Bakugo. He looked up to his boyfriend's face, but couldn't decipher any emotion from him, as he had already fallen back asleep. Midoriya could tell, just from looking, that Bakugo was going to need stitches. With the blood still slowly seeping, Midoriya found a dark t-shirt in the closet and pressed it to Bakugo's thighs to hopefully help stop the bleeding. Replacing the blanket over Bakugo's legs, Midoriya reached for his phone and called one of the few numbers he had memorized. When he heard the phone pick up, he immediately started talking. "Mr. Aizawa, can Bakugo and I come in early today?" "What happened, Midoriya?" Aizawa asked, obviously concerned from his tone of voice. He relapsed and I think I need your help for the medical care. It's pretty bad, but he'll refuse going to Recovery Girl, 'cause he says it makes him want to do it again. I'll be at the school by 7, and you two can come anytime after then." "Thank you, Mr. Aizawa." Looking over to the clock, Midoriya saw that it was already 6. "Kaken, we need to get up," he whispered, helping him sit up. Midoriya helped Bakugo pull on a hoodie, and then stood up to step into some sweatpants he had made sure were black. He shoved Bakugo's uniform into his backpack to change into later. "We're leaving early, okay?" he whispered, and Bakugo just numbly nodded. "You go on through the house and meet me out front." Midoriya said, already heading towards the window. Midoriya stood in front of Bakugo's house for 4 minutes before Bakugo walked out holding 2 granola bars for their breakfasts. Piggyback ride? Midoriya asked hesitantly. He really didn't want Bakugo moving his legs so much before they were even bandaged, but there was only so much he would be able to do about it. Bakugo shook his head, mumbling something about being fine, and began walking towards the school, wincing with each step. Thankfully, Bakugo's house was the closest to UA out of all 3 of their homes. It took much longer than usual with Bakugo's decreased speed, but they still arrived at 7:15. When they arrived, Aizawa was waiting for them, standing next to the main entrance. "Why is he here?" Bakugo mumbled. "I called him, 'cause the cuts on your legs were just really bad, and I can't take care of them myself. That's why we're here so early." Bakugo had barely been paying any attention to what had been going on around him, and even now, after walking to school, everything still felt foggy. "Let's go up to the nurse's room, okay?" Aizawa said. "Recovery girl isn't here, is she?" Bakugo whispered. He really didn't want to have to deal with that. No recovery girl. Just normal medical care," Midoriya responded. In the nurse's room, Aizawa instructed Bakugo to sit on the bed. "Midoriya said that you had a relapse," he said. Bakugo nodded, not looking up at the man. "That's okay, kid. That's a normal part of recovery. We just need to make sure that you're safe now. So, can you show me where you're injured, please?" Bakugo lifted the bottom of his hoodie, then mumbled, "And thighs. Thighs are worse, I think, from how it feels, but I haven't looked yet." "Okay, thank you, Bakugo. Can we start by cleaning off your thighs?" Bakugo agreed, so Aizawa went to wash his hands and returned with a cloth and bowl of water, and when he returned, Bakugo's thighs were uncovered. By now, it seemed the slow bleeding had stopped, Midoriya noticed. Aizawa began carefully wiping away the dried blood with a wet cloth. As he ran it over one of the deeper injuries, it began bleeding again, so Aizawa quickly put pressure over it. "Some of these are going to need stitches," Aizawa stated. "I don't want to. Can't we just do butterfly tape?" Bakugo asked. With a sigh, Aizawa agreed to try using butterfly tape, but he said if it didn't work, he would be taking Bakugo to get stitches. It was nearing 7:50 when Aizawa completed Bakugo's bandages. The butterfly tape had thankfully worked, but Bakugo felt like he was some sort of mummy with how much gauze he was covered in. "Are you up to going to school today?" Midoriya asked, and Bakugo nodded. "No training until your legs are healed," Aizawa added. Bakugo wasn't pleased with that, but he couldn't say he was surprised. Kirishima had arrived around 7:40, but not wanting to intrude, he had waited in the hall. When Midoriya and Bakugo walked out of the nurse's room together, they both immediately had arms thrown around them as Kirishima leapt onto them. Kirishima pressed his forehead to Bakugo's, nearly crying as he told him how glad he was that Bakugo was okay. They were all at Midoriya's house, as his boyfriends and Aizawa all had not wanted him to immediately return home after the incident. Kirishima had also wanted to stay over, since they hadn't all stayed together for a while. Kirishima sat cross-legged with Bakugo in his lap, facing each other with their arms wrapped around each other's necks, waiting for Midoriya to get out of the shower. "You're cute," Kirishima said. "No, I'm effing not," Bakugo snapped back. He could already feel heat encroaching on his cheeks. "Adorable then? That's literally effing worse." "Hot. I can deal with that one," Bakugo laughed. Kirishima leaned closer to Bakugo, and his heartbeat began beating faster and faster. "Can I?" Kirishima whispered. He was close enough that Bakugo could feel the warm breath on his cheeks. Kirishima hadn't planned for this situation to arise, but now he was quite thankful that he had recently used mouthwash, or else he would be spending this whole time worrying over whether Bakugo thought his breath smelled bad. "Please." And then Kirishima's lips were on his. For a split second, Bakugo froze. He didn't know what to do. Was he supposed to lean into the kiss? Where were his hands supposed to go? Had he brushed his teeth well enough that morning? Then he melted into the kiss. Kirishima's hands snaked around Bakugo's head, running his fingers through Bakugo's hair, and holding the back of Bakugo's head, pulling him in deeper. "Hey, no fair. Who said you got to kiss him first?" a voice yelled. Kirishima and Bakugo pulled away from each other, looking over to see Midoriya in the doorway, just out of the shower. They couldn't speak for a moment, both still breathless as Midoriya walked over to them grinning. He was wearing one of Bakugo's t-shirts and some random shorts, and a towel laid over his still soaking wet hair. "Kiss me," Bakugo hoarsely whispered, reaching out and grabbing Midoriya's wrist and pulling him close. Midoriya's kisses are much more hesitant, lips brushing together tentatively. Hands gently roamed over Bakugo's torso, tracing small patterns onto his back. Bakugo could barely believe that just months ago, even the thought of someone else touching him, even just holding hands, had the capability to bring him to tears because of how long he had gone with no human touch whatsoever. He lifted his hands to Midoriya's back, tracing similar patterns onto his boyfriend's back in response. Kirishima couldn't deny that he was a little jealous at that moment, but he had been the first one to get to kiss Bakugo, so he gave them a moment where they could focus on nothing but each other. "Love you," Midoriya whispered, pulling away just enough to be able to speak, but still leaving nearly no space between them. "Hey," Kirishima pouted. "I love you too," he declared, jumping up and wrapping his arms around both his boyfriends. All three boyfriends were hanging out. They had gone out to dinner, also known as they ate fried chicken in the Brahms parking lot, and then had decided to go on a walk around a local park to watch the sunset. It had been getting warmer as it got closer and closer to summer, but with the slight wind and sun setting, the temperature was perfect. "Hey Eijiro, can you continue telling that story?" Bakugo asked. "The one from that night on the phone?" Kirishima responded. "Yeah, that one. We left off with Ray not wanting to talk about Edmund and Abe, right?" "Yep. It gets a lot darker from here, so be prepared. And Aizu, sorry if you're a bit confused," Kirishima chucked. "I'm pretty sure I've told you enough about it that it'll make a little sense." They continued practicing the piano piece until it was nearly perfect. They continued talking about Raymond's past and Mer's present. Eventually, Ray and Mer decided it was time that they could play the duet together. For some reason, it felt like this was a goodbye, and both Raymond and Mer knew it. Just before they began playing, Raymond spoke up, saying he wanted to tell Mer what really happened to him, Ib, and Edmund. Just in case this really was goodbye. Ray took a moment to breathe, gathering his thoughts before he began telling the story. It had been a nice day, a bit cloudy, likely about to rain within the week, but the temperature was like those perfect fall days where you can't even think about being inside because of how nice it feels outside. Raymond had been outside, working on the east side of the cabin, tending to their garden, and Abe had been on the west side. When Raymond walked around to the other side of the building, Abe was no longer anywhere to be seen. Before he knew it, he heard Abe's screaming, coming from in the forest. He began running, knowing what he would find. Edmund was always in a worse mood this season, since it was around the time Caitlin passed. When he made it to where Abe was lying limp on the dirt ground, Edmund standing over him, a blank expression on his face. Raymond rushed over to Abe, picking him up off the ground and checking for a pulse. It was faint, but it was still there. Back at the cabin, Raymond did his best to care for Abe, but he was dead by morning. Maybe he could have survived, had they lived closer to town, or had Abe had any will left to live. Edmund had returned in the middle of the night, but Ray had been too busy taking care of Abe, trying to save Abe to even notice. The next day, Ray spent the whole morning and most of the afternoon digging his brother's grave and doing his best to carve a gravestone. For the third time in his life, despite being only, he carried his brother to the grave, saying his final goodbyes, and burying his siblings 6 feet under. "You didn't tell me it was going to be that dark," Bakugo yelled, flicking Kirishima's arm. "I am confused as hell right now," Midoriya added. "Well, I don't think either of you are prepared for the next part if you thought that was the darkest part," Kirishima said. "I'm not ready to go home yet, so can we walk around a bit more?" Midoriya asked. "Sounds good to me. Maybe we can find an ice cream stand or something." Kirishima and Midoriya refused to let Bakugo stay at his own house for close to 2 weeks after the most recent incident, until he was forced to come home by his father calling him, letting him know there would be a family dinner with his grandparents, his mother's mother and father, he would need to be home for. It was a Friday afternoon when Bakugo arrived home, and he had been receiving miniature lectures from Midoriya and Kirishima all day about how if even the smallest thing happened, he needed to call them. When he walked inside, he found that only his father was home, and his mother was nowhere to be seen. In his bedroom, it took nearly 15 minutes to find more formal clothing to wear, considering most of his clothing wasn't even at his own house, and he had not done laundry at his parents' home in what felt like forever. Despite that, he did find a way to pull together an outfit nice enough for his grandparents' visit. When he returned to the dining room, he was dressed in plain black breathes and a somewhat wrinkled button-up. He sat on one end of the dining table, and his father sat at the other, both of them waiting for Mitsuki or for Mitsuki's parents to arrive home. "They're your soulmates, aren't they?" Masaru asked out of nowhere. "I don't know what the F you're talking about, old man," Bakugo retorted. He couldn't know about Kirishima and Midoriya. If he knew, it wasn't long before Mitsuki found out too. Her reaction would be bad, there was no debate about that, but he had no clue how bad it would be. "The two boys who were over here that day with you in the bathroom, and who always wait outside for you in the mornings just a few houses down. Red hair and green hair. They're your soulmates, aren't they?" His dad had seen Kirishima and Midoriya waiting for him before school? "Don't even dare tell the old hag." "I won't. I know how she can be. You've been staying with them, right?" He continued asking. "Figured it out, did ya? Who else would I be staying with?" Masaru stood from the table and sat back down a few chairs over, now next to his son. "Well," he said, "I would quite like to meet them sometime when your mom's out." "Have they been helping you?" "With the cutting stuff." Masaru made a motion against his wrist with his opposite hand that Bakugo internally cringed at. He never understood why so many adults did that. It was annoying enough when they always called it cutting, like no one else hurts themselves in different ways, but even more so when they just had to add the imagery along with their speaking. Bakugo never even self-harmed on his wrists, yet that's always the motion his father did any time the topic was brought up. Bakugo was silent for a moment before responding with a simple "he." After another moment of silence, Bakugo continued saying, "They've really helped me a lot. I don't know what I would do without them. I'm glad for that. I'm glad you found someone who can help you. Katsuki, have you found your soulmate yet? Is she appealing?" Bakugo's grandmother asked. "No soulmate yet, Grams." Bakugo responded. If he couldn't tell his mom about his soulmates, he sure as hell couldn't tell his grandma. When they got home, Bakugo's mother stopped him before he could escape to his bedroom. "On the topic of soulmates," she said, "Izuku still doesn't know, right?" "Of course he doesn't, old hag," Bakugo responded. He could see her hand begin to lift to thwack him across the head, but when her eyes darted to his arm, where she had hit him, she let her hand fall back down. "Good," she snapped. "Because I will not have a little fgot son living in this house." Bakugo just nodded, excusing himself, and walking back to his bedroom. She will not have a little fgot son living in this house. He wasn't just going to magically turn straight, and he couldn't exactly fully move out. She was going to have a little FG son, no matter what anyone did. She won't have a little FG son living in this house. But she can have a little FG son dead in this house. He knew that train of thought was illogical, but that didn't stop his line of thought in any way. Bakugo had everything he needed in his room. He had kept it for years, in case of emergencies, but now, that didn't bode so well for him. He pulled the little box out of the closet, opening it, revealing a rope, already tied, a bottle of pills, and a knife. As he emptied it onto the floor, he began shaking. He didn't want to do this. Bakugo scooted as far away from the pile of stuff as he could. It felt as if he was there for hours, shaking and rocking back and forth, just trying to convince himself to not do it. He didn't want to, he really didn't, but when he had everything he needed to so close, it was much harder than he would have expected. He couldn't take this panicking any longer. It was already nearing 2 a.m., and Bakugo knew he should call Midoriya or Kirishima, but it was late, and he didn't want to wake either of them up. He reached for his phone and instead began dialing his most recently added contact. "Who is this?" a groggy voice said from the other side. "Bakugo." "Katsuki," he responded quickly. "What's going on, kid?" Aizawa immediately sounded much more alert and much more concerned. "Can't be alone right now. Do you need me to come get you? Or do you just want to talk? Aizawa asked. Bakugo didn't understand how he stayed so calm, yet did it in a way that was clearly intentional and didn't make it seem like he was just calm because he didn't care. I think you might need to. I don't know if I'm safe alone right now. Where are you right now? I'm at my house. Can we meet outside? I don't want to wake my mom. Bakugo gave Aizawa his address, and then quietly snuck out in front of his house, sitting out on the sidewalk. 7 minutes later, Aizawa was standing in front of Bakugo and helping him up off the concrete. Do you want me to take you to Midoriya or Kirishima's house? Aizawa asked. His arm was wrapped protectively around Bakugo's shoulder, halfway supporting the boy's weight. No, can I just stay with you? Okay kid, Aizawa said with a sigh. He honestly would have felt more comfortable had Bakugo stayed with someone he was closer to like his boyfriends, but if this was what he would rather, Aizawa would comply. It's gonna be a little bit of a walk. Is that okay with you? Bakugo just nodded. They walked through the dark neighborhood, Bakugo leaning into Aizawa for support. At first Aizawa had been concerned that he was injured, but soon realized that Bakugo was just exhausted, having barely slept since the night previous, at least. Aizawa didn't ask what happened that made Bakugo need to call him in the first place. He wanted to give Bakugo a chance to bring it up himself instead. When Bakugo did speak up, Aizawa thought it would be to tell him what was wrong, but instead the boy had said, "I'm sorry for making you come get me in the middle of the night." "There's nothing to apologize for," Aizawa responded. "I gave you my personal phone number for a reason." Bakugo didn't speak again until they arrived at Aizawa's apartment. When he went inside, he was instructed to sit on the sofa. "Would you like some tea?" Aizawa spoke from the kitchen. "Sure," Bakugo responded. He sat on the sofa, scanning his eyes over the dark room. There was at least a week's worth of empty coffee mugs scattered across the living room. He felt a funny tickling on his legs, and looked down to see a cat. He reached down, beginning to pet them, when a voice spoke from the doorway. "Her name's Miso," Aizawa said, standing in the doorway, and holding 2 mugs. He walked over, handing one of the mugs to Bakugo. "It's supposed to help you sleep." "Thank you." "What happened, kid?" Aizawa found a seat on the sofa, next to the boy, but with a comfortable amount of space between them. "I didn't relapse," Bakugo responded, refusing to look anywhere in the direction of his teacher. "My mom was being an old hag and said she didn't want Fgot's son living in her house. So I thought I could give her Fgot's son dead in her house instead," he whispered. "I called you before I did anything. I just knew if I stayed alone much longer, I would have done something. What your mother said to you wasn't okay. It says nothing about you and what you're really like. All it does is prove what a horrible mother she is." He watched as Bakugo took a sip of his tea, not responding, but still obviously listening. "Did you do anything before you called me?" Bakugo stayed silent for a few moments, still drinking his tea, before he answered. "I got out the stuff to do it. I didn't do anything with them though." Aizawa said, requesting clarification. "Not self-harm, more like the final it. Do you still want to right now?" "No. I don't think I really wanted to from the beginning, but I especially don't now." Nodding, Aizawa gave Bakugo a small smile and wrapped his arm gently around the boy, trying to give him a quasi-hug without scaring him. "I'm glad you remembered to call me kid." Bakugo just hummed. "How are you feeling?" Bakugo paused, not about to kill myself, but not great. "What do you want me to do?" Aizawa tightened his arm around Bakugo's shoulders. "Can we just sit? Maybe turn on some cartoons? Or just trashy TV?" "Okay kid, we can do that." Aizawa pulled away from the boy, standing up to grab the TV remote. When he returned to the sofa, he picked Miso up and set her in Bakugo's lap, and returned to Bakugo's side. "Where's Kaken?" Midoriya asked. Kirishima was standing at the corner where they usually met, but Bakugo was nowhere in sight. Midoriya reached for his phone to call Bakugo, but instead saw a message. "Don't wait for me, I'll be at school early today." Delivered 4:12 a.m. They were both concerned from that message, sensing that something was wrong, and quickly began heading for the school. When they arrived, Midoriya sent a message, asking where Bakugo was when they found he was nowhere to be seen in the classroom. Within a minute, he got a response saying, "Teacher Lounge." When the two boys walked into the teacher lounge, they found that their boyfriend was sitting on the sofa, a cat in his lap, and Aizawa drinking a mug of coffee just next to him. "What's going on, cats?" Kirishima asked. "Just had a bad night." Called him. Bakugo gestured to the teacher sitting next to him. "And this is the sweetest cat I have ever met," he said, continuing to slide Miso's back as she laid, purring in his lap. Since Bakugo and Miso had gotten along so well and Bakugo had seemed to need the extra comfort, Aizawa had ended up bringing her to school with them. "Bad night?" Midoriya questioned. "Yeah. The old hag was being bitchy. I didn't want to be alone, so I called Mr. Aizawa." Midoriya glanced over his boyfriend, trying to visibly check that everything was alright. He had no visible injuries, no bruises which wouldn't usually cause flowers depending on the severity. He seemed happy, content, where he was, with the cat in his lap, and laying on the sofa comfortably, just inches between him and Aizawa. "Bakugo, if you would like, you can do your work here today. With Midoriya and Kirishima too. I'm not sure you're quite up to going into class today, and you don't have a uniform." Bakugo hesitated, but eventually agreed, as did Midoriya and Kirishima. For the whole morning, the three boys sat together in the teacher lounge, working through their assignments, rotating between sitting on the sofa and on the floor at the coffee table. Every hour or so, a teacher would enter the room, greeting the three boys. Considering there were no questions asked, they guessed Aizawa had already told the teachers. At lunch, Midoriya ventured down to the cafeteria, returning with 3 trays of that day's school lunch: rice, beef and vegetable stir-fry, soup, and a small packet of cookies. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that they asked about the previous night. "What really happened last night?" Kirishima asked. "What do you mean?" "The old hag was just being a beach." "What happened that made you need to call Aizawa?" "She essentially said she didn't want a gay son living in her house." "I went off the deep end, and was convinced that meant she wanted a gay son dead in her house." Bakugo's voice shifted into a whisper, nearly fearful of the response he would get to telling them the truth. "What, did you do anything?" Midoriya asked, scooting closer to Bakugo until the sides of their thighs touched. "No. I panicked a bit, but before I did anything, I called Mr. Aizawa. He came to pick me up around 2 in the morning. He offered to take me to your guys' places, but I just went to his place, 'cause he was already awake." "Did he help you?" "Yeah. He made me tea, let me hold his cat. He sat with me on the sofa for hours, watching cartoons and sheet, till I finally passed out." "I'm glad you called him Bakugo," Kirishima said, grabbing his hand and squeezing. "And I'm sorry that you had to go through that." "It's okay. I'm feeling a lot better now." "I know, Kaken. I know you did everything you were supposed to, but would you be okay with staying at my house, or Kirishima's, for a little while?" "Are you kidding?" Bakugo yelled. "I would rather stay with you guys. I just went home occasionally when I got worried about staying over too much." "You don't need to worry about that," Kirishima said. "We love it when you stay over, and both my mom and Inko do too." It was Saturday morning, and Bakugo wasn't responding to his messages. Bakugo had spent the previous night at his house, and Kirishima was busy going and seeing family out of town, and Midoriya was getting more concerned by the minute. He checked his watch, looking to see if it was already past 9, when Mitsuki left for work, and it was. He grabbed his backpack, threw a few snacks, some cozy clothes, and a journal into it, let his mother know he was leaving, and went on his way towards Bakugo's house. Summer was nearing, and Midoriya was glad it was still so early in the morning, because he could tell that it was not going to be a nice day to be outside. When he knocked on the front door, he was greeted by Masaru. "Izuku," Masaru said, his voice masked with a questioning tone. He stepped to the side, allowing Midoriya to step inside. Masaru had obviously recently gotten up, with his disheveled hair, nearly full cup of coffee, and the bathrobe, t-shirt, and plaid PJ briefs. "Yes, sir, I am," Midoriya responded. "Katsuki's soulmate?" he asked, then corrected himself by saying, "One of Katsuki's soulmates." "You know? That he has 2 soulmates?" Midoriya whispered. "Yes, I know. And I know he's been staying with you, and the red-haired kid. I wanted to thank both of you for taking care of him. He seems to really need that time away from here." Midoriya nodded along, a small smile creeping in on his face as he realized how truly different Mitsuki and Masaru were. "I'm assuming you're here to see him. I think he's still sleeping, but he won't mind if you go ahead and go in. It's the last room on the left." "Thank you, Mr. Bakugo," Midoriya said, and then shuffled off towards Bakugo's bedroom. "Kakin you up?" Midoriya said, standing just inside the doorway. It was still early, but with the time that Bakugo went to bed, it was rare for Bakugo to sleep past 6:30, even on weekends. Bakugo grumbled back, pulling the covers over his head. Walking over and sitting on the edge of his bed, Midoriya placed a hand over what he assumed was Bakugo's shoulder. "What's going on, honey?" he asked. "Never called me that before," Bakugo mumbled, ignoring Midoriya's question. Midoriya pulled back the covers just enough to reveal Bakugo's head. Despite the blanket now being wrapped around Bakugo's neck, Midoriya still could not see his face, as it was buried into a pillow. "What's going on?" Midoriya asked again. "You're usually up 3 hours before now at least." "I've been up for like 4. And you haven't gotten out of bed at all?" Bakugo shook his head. Midoriya reached his hand down, turning Bakugo's face to face him, and his face was nothing but pure exhaustion. "I know I look awful. You shouldn't have to see me like this," Bakugo whispered, turning his face back away from Midoriya. No, Midoriya said. "You're just having a bad day is all. And that's perfectly okay." The hand was placed on Bakugo's face, his thumb rubbing gently over Bakugo's cheekbone. Midoriya looked around the room, seeing its worse-than-usual state, with many days pile-up of laundry and dishes. "Did this just start today?" Midoriya asked. Bakugo shook his head, and he took a deep breath, as if he was gaining the energy to respond. "It started a while ago. Today's just the worst. You didn't tell me or Ijiro. I didn't notice, till it got real bad. How about we do a little self-care today then?" Bakugo hesitantly nodded, unsure of what this would involve. Midoriya pulled back the blanket a little further, encouraging Bakugo to get out of bed, just to reveal that he was still wearing his school uniform from the previous day. "Let's get you in some cozier clothes first," Midoriya said, already reaching into his bag and pulling out one of his hoodies and setting it on the bed. He had to do most of the work, finding the clothes, getting Bakugo out of his uniform, and getting him into the sweatpants and hoodie, but 10 minutes later, Bakugo was out of his school clothes and sitting upright, which was definitely progress. "Are you okay if I leave for a minute? If you aren't, please tell me." "Yeah, I'll be FNG fine. Don't freak out," Bakugo said, his voice lacking its usual snap. 15 minutes later, Midoriya returned, holding 2 bowls of oatmeal and 2 cups of tea. Bakugo had no clue how he'd balance them all. "Your dad made the oatmeal. He added apples and cinnamon for you too," Midoriya said, passing Bakugo a bowl and a mug of tea. "Thank you." Bakugo sat silently on his bed as he ate, not raising his eyes from the bowl of oatmeal once. After just a few bites, he stopped eating altogether. "Are you full?" Midoriya asked, noticing the bowl sitting in his lap. "I'm just not hungry." Midoriya took the bowl from Bakugo's lap and set it on Bakugo's side table along with piles of dishes from the past few days. "Do you think you could take a shower? That sometimes makes me feel better." Bakugo turned his head toward Midoriya, thinking of a response. "Only if you're with me," is what Bakugo finally settled on. It felt like he'd been alone for so long. Now that Midoriya was there with him, he didn't think he could stand to leave his side. In the shower? Or just in the bathroom? Shower, if not, bathroom, wherever. Just not alone. He shouldn't have asked Midoriya that. He didn't mean to make Midoriya uncomfortable, and now that Midoriya was uncomfortable, he was going to leave. Bakugo was going to be alone again, without Midoriya there. "Let's go get some water running then," Midoriya responded, interrupting Bakugo's thoughts. Bakugo followed Midoriya all the way to his bathroom. It was strange to see Bakugo so quiet and subdued. Midoriya reached into the shower, turning the shower nearly all the way to hot. Turning to Bakugo, Midoriya reached his hands up, brushing over Bakugo's hair. "We're gonna need to condition this, for sure," he said, running his fingers through the knotted hair. Once the water was warm enough, Midoriya asked, "Can you undress yourself?" Bakugo nodded, so Midoriya turned away, pulling his own clothing off as Bakugo did the same behind him. Midoriya held out a hand, steadying Bakugo as he helped him step into the shower. It was warm, and the water pelting down on Bakugo's back felt wonderful. He leaned forward, letting his head rest in the crook of Midoriya's neck. He felt himself begin to tremble, as if he were crying without the tears. "It's okay," Midoriya whispered. He rubbed circles onto Bakugo's back, doing anything he could to comfort the boy. Midoriya laid a hand in Bakugo's hair, tilting his head back into the water. Bakugo sighed as he felt Midoriya began massaging shampoo into his hair. The touch was gentle, fingers rubbing his scalp, and gently working his way through the knotted hair. Once his hair was fully soaked through with conditioner, Midoriya had Bakugo turn around and began rubbing a soapy washcloth in large circles over his back. There were more recent scars than there had been previously, but Midoriya thanked God that everything was still fully healed, and nothing from the past week that Bakugo had been on a downward spiral. Turning Bakugo back around, Midoriya rubbed the cloth over Bakugo's chest and stomach, and tried doing the same for Bakugo's arms, but Bakugo pulled away. "What's with your arm?" Midoriya asked, trying to lean to the side enough to see Bakugo's arms held behind his back. "Come on, you don't need to be scared, honey." Bakugo hesitantly released his arms, placing them back at his sides. Midoriya carefully caressed his arm, holding it in between them, trying to see past the water falling over both of them. Gently, Midoriya brushed his thumb over the red, irritated skin. "What did you do, Cats?" he whispered. "If I don't bleed, you don't see it." "The flowers," Bakugo whispered back. He hadn't meant to scratch himself, he had just done it in a fit of panic, and he realized that the relief wasn't the same, but it was something, and Midoriya and Kirishima didn't have to know about it. "It's still hurting yourself. You can call me anytime. You should call me when you feel like that." 15 minutes later, both boys were out of the shower and wrapped in fluffy blankets. Bakugo had refused any sort of bandages on the irritated skin across his arms, which Midoriya was not pleased with. They sat together on Bakugo's bed, and Midoriya held the other's arms in his hands. He may have refused bandages, but Midoriya insisted on using some lotion at the very least, to hopefully make them itch less so Bakugo would be less likely to want to do it more. When Midoriya began getting dressed, he heard Bakugo speak again. "Those are my fault," Bakugo said, his brow furrowed in concern. Midoriya followed Bakugo's gaze down to his own thighs. "Kaken, none of that is your fault. At all." Midoriya pulled on a shirt, and walked back towards Bakugo and sat on the bed so close he was practically in Bakugo's lap. "These," Midoriya said, skimming his fingers over the pink lines on his thighs, "are not because of you, and never will be." "But Bakugo tried saying, but he was hushed by Midoriya. "Let me tell you something," Midoriya began saying, as he wrapped an arm around Bakugo's back. "It was a long time ago, before you started self-harming, but do you remember any strange petals coming from the top of your head?" Bakugo froze for a moment and then slowly nodded his head. "You know, I can be really anxious. I was that way when I was a kid too, obviously. When everything got to be too much and I'd start to panic, I would scratch myself." Midoriya lifted Bakugo's hand to his head, guiding his fingers to a memorized spot on his head. "There's still a bump there from how much I would scratch at it. That's self-harm, and I did that before you ever started self-harming, to my knowledge." Bakugo let his hand relax, still pressed onto Midoriya's head. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, I did this stuff without even meaning to, before I even knew what self-harming was. None of this was ever your fault." "Do you still do that? With the scratching?" Bakugo asked, looking up to meet Midoriya's eyes. "It happens occasionally when I'm stressed and zone out a bit too much. But now, I catch myself before it gets too bad, like it used to." "Good. Do you still think those scars are your fault?" Midoriya whispered. Bakugo shook his head, leaning forward, wrapping his arms around Midoriya's back and burying his face into Midoriya's chest. Midoriya didn't know how much time had passed when Bakugo did finally detach himself from his chest, but Midoriya had not minded. It was honestly nice to have the warmth of his boyfriend in his lap. "Are you feeling any better?" Midoriya asked. Only a little. Still mostly feel like sheet. Feeling better's a lot harder than it's supposed to be. Yeah, it can be, Midoriya said, giving him a gentle smile. This happens to you too, right? You mean depressive episodes? Bakugo nodded. Yeah, they do. I had them more when I was a bit younger than I do now though. What would you do? How'd you get through it? I had different things I'd try to do. I've been going through the list with you already, actually, getting you in clean clothes, taking a shower, trying to get some food in you. I'm tired of feeling like this. Can we, Bakugo paused, do more stuff from that list? Midoriya nodded. How about cleaning your room up a bit? I'm here to help so it shouldn't be so bad. Bakugo nodded and pulled himself up from the bed, awkwardly standing as if he was waiting for Midoriya to tell him what to do because he was. Noticing, Midoriya said, how about you pick up some of the dirty laundry, and I'll work on the dirty dishes? After half an hour of cleaning, Bakugo's room was still nowhere near what would be considered a properly clean room, but it had made much progress. There were no longer clothes scattered across the floor, nor were there dishes on every possible surface. The clean clothes hadn't been folded, but at least they had been put in drawers, and the other items laying across the floor hadn't been put in proper spots exactly, but at least they were in the closet where they weren't visible, weighing down the whole room. Just as they were finishing up cleaning the room, Bakugo looked over to see Midoriya about to pick up a book off the floor. One specific book Bakugo kept there for a reason. Wait, don't dash, Bakugo said. It was half a second too late, and Midoriya had already picked up the book. Please don't be mad at me, Bakugo pleaded. I'm not mad, Midoriya said, picking up the blade off the floor from where it had been hidden underneath the book. Bakugo could feel his heartbeat speeding up, and his whole body was going tingly. With a giant lump in his stomach, it felt as if he was going to puke. I'm not going to take it unless you say you're okay with that, Midoriya said, shocking Bakugo. Are you okay with that? Bakugo shook his head, scared to even open his mouth with how nauseous he had gotten. Okay, Midoriya said, I still need you to tell me, are there any others in here? Bakugo nodded. Underneath my lamp and behind that poster, Bakugo said, pointing to the wall, and trying to ignore how much his hand was shaking. And one in the middle drawer of my desk, underneath the pens, and the last one's in the back of my notebook for school. In my backpack. Midoriya nodded, not showing any positive or negative reaction to Bakugo's words. I'm not going to take these, Midoriya said. But, I'm going to clean all of them, and we're going to find somewhere more sanitary to put them. Is that okay? Bakugo nodded again, following Midoriya to the bathroom where he washed the blades and wiped them down with rubbing alcohol. When they returned to the room, Bakugo suggested they put them in his bedside table, but Midoriya refused. We should find somewhere farther away from your bed. As a safety measure. Eventually they settled on putting them in a plastic bag and set it in the windowsill behind the curtain. It wasn't like Bakugo was worried about his parents taking them, so the placement didn't particularly matter. The only reason they had been hidden so all over the place in the first place was because he'd been worried about Kirishima or Midoriya taking them. Typically, seeing his blades didn't trigger him unless it was one he hadn't seen in a long time or one he had come across accidentally, which he was thankful for, and even if he hadn't been using them, knowing that the blades weren't there usually made him panic or relapse. It was the main reason he hadn't gotten rid of them, even after starting recovery with Kirishima and Midoriya's help. Immediately after the blades were out of sight, Bakugo was practically tackled by Midoriya, throwing his arms around Bakugo's neck and tightly hugging him. I'm proud of you. You know that, right? Midoriya said, with a quick peck placed on Bakugo's cheek. Bakugo just shrugged, a slight hint of blush covering his face and the tips of his ears. Do you think you have enough energy to go outside? Midoriya asked, but Bakugo shook his head. You want to do something here then? Or do you think you just need more rest? Rest, Bakugo mumbled. But don't leave. Please, he quickly added, a tone of desperation in his voice. I won't leave you. I promise. Here, sit, Midoriya said, pulling out the chair to Bakugo's desk. Just wait a minute for me, okay? Bakugo agreed. Midoriya left the room, doing who knows what, and returned 5 or so minutes later, holding a laundry basket, with a nicely folded pile of bedsheets and pillowcases. Bakugo tried getting up to help his boyfriend, but Midoriya just shook his head, saying that Bakugo didn't need to unless he really wanted to. Midoriya stripped down the bed to its mattress, turning away when he noticed the old he hoped bloodstains soaking through it. He pulled the fitted sheet tight over the mattress, and then a top sheet over it. Again, Midoriya left the room, this time leaving, taking the basket now full of dirty sheets and blankets with him. 5 minutes passed and Bakugo began to wonder when Midoriya was coming back. Another 5 minutes, and Bakugo was starting to get worried. Just as he was considering getting up and searching for his boyfriend, Midoriya returned, a pile of blankets in his arms and yet another mug of tea in his hand. "Get over here," Midoriya said, sitting on the bed, patting the spot next to him. "Your tea, good sir," Midoriya said in a joking tone, passing the mug to Bakugo once he was seated. Bakugo took the tea in his hands, silently thanking Midoriya with a nod. Then, there was a blanket thrown over his shoulder, and it was nothing but soft and warm. The blanket was wrapped around his left side, and Midoriya's right, with their sides pressed flush against each other. Bakugo could now tell why Midoriya had been gone in the first place. With how warm the blanket was, there was no way that Midoriya hadn't put them in the dryer to warm them up. "This is kinda nice," Bakugo said, letting his head fall to the side, laying on Midoriya's shoulder. Before he even knew it, he was half asleep and the mug of tea was removed from his actively faltering grasp, and then he was fully gone. For the rest of the morning, Midoriya sat, Bakugo napping leaned onto him. It was almost as if he was scared to move, scared to wake Bakugo. He was so utterly exhausted. This episode seemed to be one where he wanted to sleep, and could barely get himself out of bed, yet he could not seem to fall asleep. Midoriya would be shocked if Bakugo had gotten more than 3 consecutive hours of sleep over the past week. He knew that Bakugo needed any sleep he could get, and by no means was Midoriya going to interrupt that. When Bakugo came to, everything was foggy. He tried opening his eyes, but he still couldn't see more than a few blobs, and the light was so bright that he found it more comforting to not see at all. He didn't know where he was. He just knew he was warm and he felt safe. Safer and cozier than he had in a while now. Right? He was having a bad week before now. Why had he felt bad in the first place? He couldn't quite remember. As he stretched his mind, trying to reach the distant thought, it all came rushing back to him, and it felt as if he was being crushed by the weight of reality. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, trying to stifle his tears. "What are you sorry for, honey?" That was Midoriya's voice. Midoriya was here. Midoriya didn't hate him. Midoriya was there, sitting with him, and had an arm wrapped protectively around him. "I was an a-hole. I am an a-hole." "What do you mean, cats? Do you not remember all the shit I said to you in middle school?" Midoriya froze. Of course he remembered the things Bakugo said to him in middle school. How could he forget? But that's now what was important. What's important is that he doesn't say things like that anymore. "God, what if you actually followed through with half the things I told you?" Bakugo's voice was panicked as all the possible situations ran through his head. He couldn't even imagine what he would do now if he lost Midoriya. "I'm so sorry. I'm so effing sorry. Please, just tell me what I can do to make it up to you. Tell me what I need to do for you to forgive me." "Kaken, I forgave you for that stuff a long time ago. We've all been little sheets as kids at some point or another. Stuff you said wasn't okay, but I know you would never say it now, and that's what matters to me. But did you believe those things I told you? Do you still?" Midoriya was silent for a moment. Part of him wanted to keep it a secret, to never speak of it again, but the part of him that valued honesty and being open with those he was close to was still stronger. "Only sometimes now. Less than I did in middle school. Did you ever do anything that I said you should have?" Bakugo's voice was heavy with fear as his own words echoed through his head. "If you believe they're holding your quirk over in the next world." He didn't mean it. He never meant it. There were many things he regretted and wished to take back from his lifetime, but none as much as those words he spoke. "You should just dive off the rooftop. Do you want to know the truth?" Midoriya asked. Bakugo was scared, but nodded nonetheless. He had to know. "I thought about it. I nearly did it once. But I never actually followed through." Bakugo pulled himself up, wrapping his arms tight around Midoriya, feeling his presence. He was still here and he was okay. I'm so sorry, Bakugo said, clutching tighter to his boyfriend. You're not the same as you were back then. I forgave you a long time ago. I don't deserve your forgiveness. So you think you haven't changed? Unless you're saying you would still say those things again, I think you're fully deserving. I would sooner kill myself than saying that again, Bakugo snapped. Don't say things like that, honey, Midoriya whispered. He set a hand on Bakugo's cheek, tilting his face within reach, and placed a gentle kiss on Bakugo's forehead. God, you two, I'm trying to do my effing homework, can you not wait half a effing hour? Bakugo said from Kirishima's desk. Midoriya and Kirishima, on the other hand, were sitting together on Kirishima's bed. He wasn't even facing them, but Bakugo could tell they were obviously flirting. Then finish your DMN homework faster and get over here, Kirishima yelled back. He fell backwards, grabbed Midoriya's shirt and pulled him down with him, and drew him into a deep kiss. 10 minutes later, Bakugo flopped onto the bed, right next to Midoriya straddling Kirishima. Before he knew it, Midoriya had rolled over and straddled him instead. Bakugo's eyes were half closed by the time their lips met. It was soft and it was gentle, Midoriya's breath tickling his face. Just from kissing Midoriya, Bakugo could taste Kirishima, or at least his green apple chapstick Bakugo constantly made fun of him for carrying around. Bakugo slid his hands under Midoriya's shirt, pulling him closer, hands resting on his shoulder blades. Midoriya pulled back for a second to speak. You want to go further? He whispered. Bakugo pulled himself up to a sitting position, letting Midoriya slide off his lap, and nodded. Not all the way. Just what you want, he said. Both boys turned to Kirishima, asking him just with their stares. Kirishima made his way over to Bakugo, sitting behind him and resting his chin on Bakugo's shoulder. I'd like that, Kirishima said quietly, not needing to speak any louder with how close their faces already were. Midoriya's fingers played with the bottom of Bakugo's shirt, looking up to him and seeing if he was okay with taking his shirt off. In a minute, Bakugo said. Yours first. Midoriya nodded, pulling his shirt off and throwing it onto the floor. Midoriya looked up, seeing both Kirishima and Bakugo's faces turning increasingly pink. Zoo, Bakugo said, his voice made of practically nothing but air. Since when do you have so much muscle? Is it a bad thing? No, Kirishima interrupted, it's hot as hell. Then, Kirishima's hands were sliding underneath Bakugo's shirt. Okay, he asked. Bakugo nodded, lifting his arms up and letting Kirishima pull his shirt off and toss it on the floor with Midoriya's. Bakugo's arms immediately wrapped around himself, subconsciously hiding the scars across his sides. It's okay, cats, we all have scars. You don't need to be worried about us seeing yours. Bakugo nodded, loosening the grip of his arms on his sides. Bakugo turned around, now facing Kirishima, and tugging on his shirt. Bakugo's hands drifted up Kirishima's torso, fingers gently skimming his skin, while Midoriya's hands wrapped around Bakugo, resting on his stomach. Kirishima leaned forward, meeting his lips with Bakugo's. He could still feel Midoriya's hands resting on his stomach, and not knowing where else to place his hands, Bakugo set them on top of Midoriya's. He felt Midoriya begin pressing slow kisses onto Bakugo's shoulder. He could smell Kirishima's cologne, but couldn't even tell if it was coming from Kirishima in front of him or Midoriya behind him. When Kirishima pulled away, both boys breathless, Bakugo turned to Midoriya. SWH with me, he said. I'm getting too warm. That was partially true, but also, he wanted Midoriya in the middle so he could get more attention. Midoriya placed his hands on Kirishima's thighs, gently squeezing. He knew Kirishima could be insecure sometimes, about how his legs were a little thicker than Midoriya or Bakugo's, how his muscle wasn't quite as defined as theirs, so each time he got a chance, he tried showing Kirishima that stuff didn't matter to him and Bakugo. God, look at you, Midoriya whispered. You are so appealing. He ran his hands over the top of Kirishima's waistband. You can if you want, Kirishima whispered, and as soon as his breaths were off, Bakugo burst out laughing. What is with you two and you 7-year-old boy boxers? He asked, still trying to stifle his laughter. Hey, nothing is wrong with my shark boxers. And I bet you $5 that Izuku is wearing dinosaur ones right now. That sounds like a waste of my $5, Bakugo chuckled back. Excuse you too, I am not in dinosaur boxers for once, Midoriya interrupted. There's no proof of that, Kirishima retorted. $5 if I'm not in dinosaur boxers? Sure, why the hell not? Izuku, Bakugo mumbled in a deep tone, already seeing where this was going and trying to warn him. He knew that this conversation with Kirishima was going to be rough in the best of situations, and this, with it rising accidentally, and Midoriya being fully unaware of what may be about to happen, this was bound to go badly. Midoriya stood up, hopping off the bed, pulling his breathes off, revealing outer space-themed boxers, and hopped back onto the bed between Bakugo and Kirishima. For a moment, Bakugo was silent, intensely staring at Midoriya. Midoriya looked back, confused, and then it hit him. No breathes. Just boxers. He looked to Kirishima, who seemed to be speaking to him, but Midoriya hadn't heard it. Midoriya hummed, asking Kirishima to repeat himself. I said, I guess I owe you $5, Kirishima's voice trailed off. Midoriya clenched his eyes shut as he realized Kirishima had seen. Fingertips skimmed his thighs, over the harsh pink marks across his thighs. You never told me, he said. His voice was weak and wispy. He didn't tell you, Midoriya repeated back, his voice nothing more than a whisper, and hot tears on his cheeks, mirroring the ones on Kirishima's face. How did you hide it from both of us? Kirishima asked. With the flowers, how? He sounded absolutely distraught, and Midoriya couldn't tell if it was with concern and care, or if it was because he was upset at Midoriya for hiding this from him. Maybe it was both. I didn't. Kirishima looked at him, eyes filled with confusion, until Bakugo spoke. I knew. Since right before we were together, Bakugo said. Kirishima's hands were firm over Midoriya's thighs, holding him steady. How? Was all he said. I've only done it twice, Midoriya mumbled. First time was right before we found out about Kaken, and you assumed it was our soulmate. Second time, Kaken covered for me. Why didn't you tell me? Kirishima said, turning to Bakugo. He didn't sound angry, but he was evidently upset and worried, and even sounded a bit hurt. I told him he needed to, but he wasn't ready, so we waited. God, I'm so sorry I wasn't there, Kirishima cried, pulling Midoriya into a hug. Call me. If you think it might happen again. Call someone, Kirishima said, looking down at the damage done to Midoriya's thighs. How was that from only 2 times? He knew they weren't lying, Bakugo knew for sure whenever it happened, but still, it was worrisome, seeing that the 2 times Midoriya had self-harmed were similar to Bakugo's relapses after years of self-harming in comparison to when Bakugo had first started. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner, Midoriya said. You have nothing to be sorry for. But I should have told you. You should have, Kirishima agreed, but I know now. That's what's important. Do you want to talk about it? Some other time. Kirishima nodded in agreement, repeating the words, some other time, back to Midoriya. Soon, Midoriya was asleep, laying on top of Kirishima's chest. Is he really? Okay. Kirishima whispered, directing his question to the still-awake Bakugo. I think he is. Or at least he will be. Can you tell me what happened? What's happened since I wasn't there? Bakugo nodded, placing a hand over Midoriya's back, feeling the slow movement of his ribcage as he breathed deeply in his sleep. The first time he did it was before you guys knew about me. The day before you guys found out, Bakugo whispered. I was doing it, you know, and then there were flowers on my end. It really freaked me the F out, I'm not gonna lie. I didn't know which of you it was. Then how'd you find out it was him and not me? Kirishima asked. You know how you squeeze his thigh a lot? Kirishima nodded. I saw him flinch from that. In the cafeteria, so I just assumed it was him. The morning after you found out I was your soulmate, I asked him about it. He begged me not to tell you. I made sure to take care of him, and I told myself if it happened again, I would tell you. But it's happened twice. Meaning you didn't, Kirishima said back, his tone quite matter-of-fact. I didn't, Bakugo repeated. The second time, I woke up to the flowers and went straight to his house to check on him. He was scared as any hell about what you'd think or say. I think he may have been scared for you too. Since I've done it and he's done it, I bet he was scared of you self-harming. He was in such a fragile state, I couldn't say no when he asked me not to tell. Bakugo paused, turning over on his side to face both Midoriya and Kirishima more. He shifted his hand across Midoriya's back, and instead placed it halfway over Kirishima's hand, also resting on Midoriya. Since then, I've been telling him he needed to talk to you about it, but I wasn't going to go tell you without him knowing or being okay with it. Thank you, was all Kirishima said. There's nothing to thank me for. If anything, you should be mad that I hid it from you, Bakugo said back, trying to keep his voice quiet enough that Midoriya wouldn't wake up. Kirishima ignored Bakugo's statement and just kept talking. Thank you for being there for him. And taking care of him. I don't think I could stand to imagine if both of you had to go through that alone. It's hard enough, seeing you hurt and knowing you had next to no one for so long. I'm glad that you were there for him even though I couldn't be, so maybe it won't be as hard for him. I hope it won't be as hard for him too. I hope we can both be there for him now. When Midoriya awoke, he was entangled with Bakugo. It was warm, with his back pressed to Bakugo's still bare chest, and Bakugo's hand resting comfortably against Midoriya's stomach. Bakugo's knee laid between Midoriya's thighs, and he could feel the slow rise and fall of Bakugo's chest. It was cozy and warm, in Bakugo's arms, and he never wanted to leave, but as he looked around, Kirishima was nowhere to be seen. He basked in the comfort for a few more moments, hoping that Kirishima may appear, coming back from the bathroom or from getting a glass of water, and save him from having to leave the bed. Kirishima did not, and Midoriya forced himself out of Bakugo's arms. As he moved, he was careful to not wake Bakugo, and he was quiet as he pulled on a loose pair of shorts and one of Kirishima's hoodies. The bedroom wasn't cold per se, but after the warmth of laying with Bakugo, Midoriya couldn't stop his persistent shiver. It was dark, but it only took a few moments of Midoriya blindly pawing around to find a blanket and wrap it around his shoulders. The first place he checked for Kirishima was the bathroom. He knew it wasn't likely that he was there, but Midoriya knew that was the first place he would look for Bakugo if he went missing in the night, and that would be the most logical place to look for himself. When Kirishima wasn't there, Midoriya proceeded onto the kitchen, thinking that possibly Kirishima had needed a midnight snack. Again, Kirishima wasn't there. Similarly, the dining room was empty. When he finally made his way to the living room, he was getting desperate. He didn't know what to do if he didn't find Kirishima. There was no one and nothing on the sofa, and the various chairs were the same. His eyes glanced over the rest of the room, and found that in the corner of the room, leaning against the wall, sat Kirishima. "Hey," Midoriya whispered. His voice was gentle as he walked over to where Kirishima sat. "Are you doing okay?" Kirishima shrugged. "Thinking too much?" Kirishima nodded. Midoriya let out a small grunt as he seated himself next to Kirishima, their arms pressed flush against each other. "Was it about last night?" Midoriya asked. "No," Kirishima said. "Not really." His voice was raspy and hushed, and Midoriya could tell, just from the sound, that he had been crying. "When things happen, like last night, I can't really sleep well after." "That makes sense," Midoriya said, trying to reassure him. "But when I can't sleep, then I start thinking too much. About things I shouldn't." "What things was it tonight?" "Mostly me. Insecurities and that sort of thing. I mean, look at me." Midoriya let a head fall onto Kirishima's shoulder. "Yes, look at you," he repeated back. Midoriya held Kirishima's hand in his own, tracing small designs over his skin. "You're nothing but appealing, Aijiro." "You've been hurting yourself," Kirishima said, ignoring Midoriya's statement. "You've been hurting yourself, so I need to be there for you right now. So that I can help you." No. I'm not going to claim I'm all better, but I've been doing better. Right now, you're the one who needs taking care of, not me." Midoriya shifted, lifting his head off Kirishima's shoulder and pulling Kirishima down into his lap. Kirishima was tense for a moment, but soon he complied, letting himself sink into Midoriya, using the boy's lap as a pillow. "Yai, will you talk to me? About what you've been thinking about?" Kirishima nodded, pausing for a moment as he felt Midoriya's fingers interlace with his own, resting just atop his chest. "I was thinking about how I look again." Like, my body. Midoriya was silent, but Kirishima could tell he was listening intently nonetheless. I was thinking about not eating again. Like I used to in middle school. Kirishima felt Midoriya's other hand make its way to his hair, gently running fingers through it. I just couldn't stop thinking that having thicker thighs or a bigger stomach isn't manly. As Kirishima turned, burying his face in Midoriya's stomach, Midoriya could tell he was done sharing, for now at least. There's nothing unmanly about your thighs or your stomach, Midoriya began saying, trying to be careful of his wording. He himself had never dealt with this sort of thing, and he didn't want to accidentally say anything wrong that could potentially further trigger his boyfriend. And I happen to find them rather attractive, Midoriya said, a red-hot blush spreading over both his face and Kirishima's. He continued, and eating food, it really helps you. Kirishima snorted. I bet heroes eat a lot, so that they have enough energy to train, and so they have energy to save people. I bet they do, Kirishima mumbled, a small smile on his face. Midoriya looked at the clock, seeing it was nearing 4 am. Have you slept at all yet? He asked. Kirishima shook his head. Do you want to go to bed? No. Your lap's really cozy. Midoriya nodded. Just try to get some rest, he whispered, continuing to run his fingers through Kirishima's bright red hair. It had been nearly 4 weeks since Bakugo had returned to his home, other than the few visits he had to pick up clothes and other things he left there. By now, it was nearly as if more of his stuff was at Kirishima or Midoriya's house than was at his own. He missed his room sometimes, and even occasionally his dad too, but overall, he was much happier getting to stay with Midoriya and Kirishima. It made him glad his parents had never gotten him a cat or dog like he had begged for years as a child, because he knew that leaving would not be nearly as easy if he had something so important to leave behind. Given how long it had been, he started thinking that maybe he should call his father. It's not like he had done anything so blatantly wrong as his mother had, he had just been oblivious to certain things a parent should do for their children. He knew his relationship with his mother was doomed and likely unfixable, but with his father he thought he might still have a chance. Masaru had reached out to him once or twice to make sure he was doing okay, but Bakugo's answers had been short, curt, and as vague as possible. This specific night, he was staying with Kirishima. Kirishima had stayed inside to work out in preparation for some upcoming endurance tests at school, but Bakugo had gone outside instead, to sit on the porch and enjoy the nice weather. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision when he grabbed his phone out of his pocket and began dialing one of the first phone numbers he'd ever learned. It rang 2 times, and then a voice from the other end said, Katsuki? Hey, old man. Has something happened? Masaru asked. He sounded concerned, which made Bakugo's brow furrow. When had his relationship with his father dissipated so much that they couldn't call without assuming the worst? No, nothing, just hadn't talked to you in a while. So, you're doing okay then? And calling me because you just wanted to talk? Yep, pretty much. How are you and the old hag doing? Well, your mom and I have been doing okay. I miss you plenty, but I think it's better for you when you're away from her. Are you still staying with your soulmates? Yeah, Izuku and Eijiro. I go back and forth every week or so, and I'm at Eijiro's now. So, the red-haired one then? Right. I was talking to Auntie, Izuku's mom Inko, about it, and maybe you could come over for dinner sometime? Both my soulmates would be there, and so would Eijiro's mom. You're invited so long as you don't tell mom about it. I would love to come, Katsuki. Well, I'll message you when we have a date set. And thanks for talking to me. One more thing before you go. I've been doing some research. When you suddenly stopped coming home even more over these past weeks, I started getting more worried for you. And ended up looking more into the issues you have. What FNG issues? He snapped, getting immediately defensive. Self-harm. I wanted to apologize for how I brushed it off in the past. And ask if you're doing okay with that now, I guess? Bakugo let out a sigh, thankful for the direction that their conversation had turned. Yeah, I've been doing pretty good. I'm close to 5 weeks clean now. Izuku and Eijiro have helped a lot. And so has this one teacher of mine. It was uncomfortable talking to his father about it given he found it uncomfortable talking to anyone about such vulnerable topics, but he was thankful for his father's seeming change of heart. I'm glad you're getting better. And I'm proud of you for that. Bakugo just hummed, not knowing what else to say. I hope I see you soon, and I love you. Love you too, Bakugo mumbled quickly, hanging up before Masaru had a chance to comment on it. It had been near impossible to schedule, finding a time that all three parents were off of work, particularly with Inko's odd work schedule. Masaru was the first to arrive to the Kirishima household, excluding Kirishima and his mother, that is. When he entered, he was first greeted by Kirishima's mother. It's so nice to finally meet you, she said, reaching out to shake a hand. The next to greet him was Kirishima, who very nervously introduced himself as Bakugo's soulmate. Katsuki and Izuku should be here soon he tried saying, but was then interrupted by the doorbell. When Inko, Midoriya, and Bakugo stepped inside, Bakugo was the first to speak, just mumbling, "Hey Dad." Midoriya hesitantly reached out, shaking Masaru's hand. "Nice to see you again," he said. "Same to you," Masaru responded, giving Midoriya an awkward but friendly pat on the shoulder. The three boys and their parents found their way to seats around the table, Bakugo between Kirishima and his father, Izuku on the other side of Kirishima. Through dinner, they sat together fairly quietly as the adults talked with each other, getting to know each other, but mostly talking about their kids. Inko and Masaru had obviously met before, and occasionally Ms. Kirishima and Inko would hang out for an afternoon, but this was Ms. Kirishima's first time meeting Masaru, and the first time all the parents Hisashi and Mitsuki excluded were all together at once. Then, much to Kirishima's dismay and his boyfriend's excitement, the childhood photo albums were pulled out. But then Inko and Masaru ended up pulling up childhood photos on their phones, successfully embarrassing all three boys, not just Kirishima. For a little while, all the parents talked with each other alone, Midoriya, Bakugo, and Kirishima having moved to the living room. "I'm sorry about how much time Katsuki has been spending at each of your houses," Masaru said. "It's no trouble at all," Inko said. "If that's what he needs, we're both more than willing to do that for him," Kirishima's mother added. "He seems to be doing a lot better now than when he was living with me and my wife. I love her, but I don't think it is healthy for them to be together. I don't even know what I can do to thank you," Masaru said. "You don't need to. We care about him and we're just happy to see that he's happy," Inko responded, patting Masaru's shoulder. "But there is one thing that I did want to talk to you about." Masaru hummed, meeting eyes with Inko. "Your boy. He's doing better, but I still think it would be good for him to be in therapy. I think it would be good for all of them, honestly." Inko's eyes drifted over to the living room where Kirishima, Bakugo, and Midoriya were all piled on the sofa. Masaru nodded along, agreeing with Inko. Before Masaru left, he gave his son a large hug and proceeded to do the same for both Kirishima and Midoriya, thanking each of them for how much they had helped his son. Just a few days later, Masaru got a message from Inko with the contact information of a therapist for them to contact. It was a Sunday, and Bakugo had been staying at Midoriya's house again. The previous night, Bakugo and Midoriya had accidentally stayed up late again, a frequent occurrence any time Bakugo stayed over. They had gotten distracted, talking together for hours, about anything and everything, from random memories they had, to movies they watched and books they read, to how many ants would it take to weigh a full pound courtesy of delirious Bakugo. Having gone to bed so late, they slept nearly until noon. Bakugo was the first to awake, and found himself pressed flush against Midoriya's torso, Midoriya's arms wrapped tight around him. Midoriya's breath was soft, tickling the back of his neck. He felt an arm shift beneath him, as Midoriya let out a small groan, beginning to awake. Just minutes after Midoriya awoke, a knock came from his bedroom door, startling both Bakugo and Midoriya, as they knew Inko had already left for work, and she was supposed to be the only other person in the house. "Why the f is someone else here?" Bakugo said, but he was interrupted by the door opening. "Looks like you two stayed up too late," Kirishima said with a laugh. "It's already noon and you're both still in bed." "How'd you get in?" "My mom left hours ago," Midoriya said, pulling himself to a halfway sitting position. "Well, You need to start locking your front door, Kirishima responded, walking the rest of the way into Midoriya's room. What's in the bag? Bakugo asked, glancing down at the plastic drugstore bag, swinging back and forth in Kirishima's hand. Hair dye, he said excitedly. For your hair? Or ours? Izuku asked curiously. I need to re-dye my roots, but they'll be extra if you want. An hour later, after Midoriya and Katsuki had eaten, the three boys found themselves on the floor of the bathroom. No one spoke of the other times all three boys sat on the floor of a bathroom, but they were all thinking of it. They were all glad the present was not a repeat of the past. Did you want to dye your hair at all? Kirishima asked, directing his words at Midoriya. It was hard for Midoriya not to laugh, with Kirishima having a plastic bag tied over his head, letting the bleach set. Maybe. Could we just do a small piece? He asked in response. Sure. We'll just need a bit of foil. You want 2 cats? He just shrugged, mumbling out, fine. Kirishima quickly ran out of the bathroom, and his step could not have had any more pep. 3 minutes later, he returned, holding a roll of tinfoil. Izuku, sit, Kirishima said, patting the floor in front of him as he too found a seat on the ground. Where do you want it? Here. Midoriya suggested, grabbing a chunk of hair on the right side of his head, just in front of his ear. Kirishima nodded, and began grabbing a small piece of foil and a bit of the leftover bleach from his own hair. Midoriya wrinkled his nose at the potent smell, as Kirishima began brushing bleach over Midoriya's dark green hair. With the foil securely wrapped around Midoriya's piece of hair, Kirishima turned to Bakugo, asking him where he wanted his red streak of hair. I don't fucking know. Surprise me, Bakugo responded. Before he knew it, there was foil wrapped around a piece of hair in the center of his forehead, and a smear of red dye across his nose, from when he had refused to stop moving like Kirishima told him to. When all their hair was dyed and rinsed, looking in the mirror, Midoriya and Kirishima couldn't stop giggling at how they all matched. Even Bakugo let out a small smile, when Midoriya started teasing him about how his red spike of hair made it look like he had a unicorn horn. Bakugo, Kirishima, and Midoriya sat awkwardly on the sofa in the therapist's waiting room. Their parents had somehow managed to find a therapist who treated both teenage soulmates and people who struggled with self-harm in specific. They were primarily there for Bakugo. Midoriya still refused to talk with a therapist or adult about his own struggles, not wanting to worry his mother, but they had decided for all three boys to come for the first session. Bakugo and Midoriya were both incessantly and anxiously fidgeting the whole time as they sat, waiting for their names to be called. When they were called into the therapist's room, there was no way to describe it other than comfortably basic. The walls were a warm off-white, some Hobby Lobby-looking art on the walls, and there were plenty of different seats to choose from, each adorned with colorful pillows. For Bakugo, it was strange to have to be so open with someone he had never met before, and he was definitely glad to have Midoriya and Kirishima there with him. He was thankful for Kirishima's hands sliding over and settling atop his own, when the therapist began to ask him about his history of self-harm, and his hands began to tremble. They primarily talked about Bakugo's self-harm, as was expected and necessary due to the potentially dangerous nature, but they somehow also found themselves talking about Kirishima's self-image issues and Midoriya's anxiety too. The session seemed to pass quicker than all of them had expected. When they walked out of the room, they were all surprised to see Masaru waiting outside for them. I already scheduled another appointment for the same time next week, he said. How did it go? Fine. But it was mostly just us explaining stuff, since it's the first session, I guess. Bakugo responded. I'm proud of you, kid. We are too, Midoriya added. Whatever, Bakugo grumbled, turning away to hide the slight blush across his cheeks. Masaru gave a gentle ruffle of Bakugo's hair, then stepped into the driver's seat of his car. Now, how about some ice cream before I take you guys home? I still sometimes don't get it, Kirishima whispered. Don't get what? Midoriya responded. Bakugo was back at his house for the moment, having wanted to visit his father, and Kirishima and Midoriya had decided that they wanted to spend some time with each other, and Midoriya hadn't wanted to have to make his own dinner, so they were staying together at Kirishima's house. Why you didn't tell me? Kirishima mumbled. About, this? Midoriya gestured to his thighs, seeing that that's where Kirishima seemed to be staring. Kirishima nodded. He understood in some ways how it must have been scary for Midoriya, but at the same time he was upset that Midoriya never felt safe enough to come to him. Hell, he didn't even find out because he had been told, he found out because Midoriya forgot he had scars when he was wearing only boxers in front of Kirishima. Yeah, it's about that. It's a bit hard to explain cause, Midoriya paused, I'm not sure even I know all of why I didn't. There was a moment of silence as Midoriya thought to himself. Kaken has self-harmed, Midoriya began saying, and so have I. I guess I thought if you knew I did it, after Kaken did it for so long, you would end up doing it too. That's what cats thought too. I want you to know, I wouldn't ever do that, Kirishima responded. I know, just, the illogical side of my brain won't stop saying what if you did, just, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself. I don't know if I could take it, and I know Kaken definitely couldn't. He already blames himself so much for me doing this. He was breathing heavily as he began hyperventilating, frantically wiping the tears from his face, just trying to make them stop. Aizu, it's okay, Kirishima repeated, holding Midoriya's hand tight until he calmed down. I didn't want you to ever have to find out. I just did it impulsively twice, but they scarred a lot, I guess. There's not much hiding this mess. Midoriya looked down at his own legs, overcome with an overwhelming feeling of regret. Hey, no part of you is a mess, except for maybe your hair, Kirishima said, lifting a hand up to ruffle Midoriya's hair. Nothing's wrong with having scars, nothing's wrong with your scars. Kirishima's hand lay gently over Midoriya's thigh. I just wish you had felt more comfortable sharing these with me. God, I hate having these scars, Midoriya mumbled. I can't even look at my own legs without feeling horrible about all this. Actually doing it, hiding it from you, and when Kaken had to come take care of me. He took care of you because he cares about you, Aizu. Look at me. Kirishima tilted Midoriya's face up towards him. Nothing is wrong with your scars. I'm not gonna say they're appealing or any of that bullcrap, but they're not ugly either. They're just a part of you, and I love all of you, scars or no scars. Midoriya nodded to Kirishima, mumbling out a thank you. I know you don't judge my scars, but what if I really don't want them? Then that's okay too. I have some scar cream I use for training injuries if you wanted to try using that. I don't know if it will get rid of them fully. Kirishima glanced down to the deep pink scars. It definitely won't get rid of all of them. But maybe it'll help you be more comfortable with yourself. Midoriya nodded again. Kirishima got up, went to his bathroom, and returned 2 minutes later, holding a bottle of scar cream. You can keep this if you want, Kirishima said, placing the bottle of cream right in front of Midoriya and then sitting back down right next to him. Do I just put some on and leave it? Midoriya asked, holding the bottle in front of his face and reading the label. It worked better for me when I massaged it in. Do you want me to show you? Midoriya nodded, passing the bottle over to Kirishima. There was a moment of silence, as Kirishima held a glob of the cream in between his hands, waiting for it to warm up before he applied it to Midoriya's thighs. His hands were gentle, working their way over the pale skin of Midoriya's thighs, focusing particularly on the raised pink bumps. He was careful as he massaged into Midoriya's thighs, and Midoriya let out a sigh with the comforting warmth of his boyfriend's hands. It's weird how Kaken and I feel so differently about the same thing, Midoriya said, as Kirishima continued massaging the cream into Midoriya's thighs. The cream was probably already fully rubbed in, but Kirishima still continued, likely just from liking how much closer it made him feel to his boyfriend. What do you mean by that? Kirishima asked. About the scars. I hate mine, but Kaken he can't stand the thought of not having his. He gets real freaked out whenever his start fading. It's also why he always refuses to get healed by Recovery Girl. I guess everyone does react differently. Kirishima placed a quick kiss on Midoriya's forehead and stood up from the bed. You should put some breathes on sometime soon, he said. I don't know how my mom would feel if you showed up to dinner in your boxers. Midoriya's face was overcome with blush as he quickly pulled on the nearest pair of breathes that he saw. Bakugo was spending the week at Kirishima's, and it was getting close to time to go to bed. Jiro, Bakugo whispered. Can you finish telling that story? Bakugo and Kirishima laid in bed together, facing each other, legs entangled and faces so close they could feel each other's breath. Which story, Corrido? Kirishima whispered back. The one from before we were together, when we called in the middle of the night, and then again at the park with Zuku. Are you feeling okay? It gets a lot darker from where we left off, and I don't want it to affect you or anything. Yeah, I am. I just want to know what happens. Bakugo scooted closer to Kirishima, wrapping his arms around Kirishima's torso and pressing his face into his boyfriend's chest. So, we're starting right after Abe died, I'm pretty sure. Bakugo nodded in agreement. All the time he spent so utterly alone, everyone he ever cared about dead and buried, Raymond couldn't stop thinking. When he returned to the cabin, he immediately headed straight for where they stored their hunting supplies, grabbing the rifle and 2 bullets. First, he found Edmund. Before he even had a chance to say anything about what he had done to Abe, he was on the ground, dead. Raymond still had the respect to bury his own father, but he sure as hell wasn't going to let anyone remember his name. Soon after the dirt had been patted down and the blank stone marker had been placed, Ray too laid on the ground, over his father's grave, rifle fallen beside him, and blood seeping into the dirt. Holy shit, was it originally planned to be that dark? Bakugo asked, pulling himself up to a half-sitting position. Pretty much, but it's not quite over yet, cats. Lay back down. When Raymond finished telling the story of his life, yet also the story of his death, Mer had tears running down their face. I'm ready to play now, if you are, Ray whispered, lifting the violin off the floor. Mer nodded, sitting at the piano, and played the first note. When Raymond joined in, playing the bittersweet notes on his violin, it felt as though there was a montage playing before them. A montage of all the time they had spent together, yet also a montage of Raymond's whole life. People say that as you are dying your life flashes before your eyes, but in the moments before Raymond's death, he saw nothing. Now though, he saw everything. He saw himself, sitting with Bessie and Abe as his mother and grandmother played their duet. He saw himself learning the violin, and practicing whenever he could with Harriet. He saw Bessie and Abe listening intently to his own stories just before their bedtime. He saw himself taking beatings from Edmund so his siblings wouldn't have to. He saw Harriet taking her last breaths, and then Bessie taking hers too. He saw his own hands, blistered and bleeding, sitting on the ground just in front of 2 new mounds of dirt, each marked with a gravestone. He saw Abe, sobbing each and every night, missing the mother he never had, missing his grandmother and sister, praying he had any other father than the one he was stuck with. He saw Abe's bloodied, bruised body limp on the forest floor, still living, yet with no will left to live. He saw the life leave his little brother's eyes. He saw his father's body, his father's blood covering his hands, and then, finally, he saw his own body, just as lifeless as the rest of them. There was a bright light, and he barely even noticed he was playing the violin anymore. He couldn't even tell if the light was moving closer to him, or if he was stepping closer to it. As it got nearer, Raymond could see through to the other side. Glancing over to Raymond, Mer could see him fading away, yet he looked happy. On the other side, there sat Bessie, sitting in Caitlin's lap, laughing and smiling with the mother she barely got to know in life. Next to Bessie and Caitlin stood Harriet. And then there was Abe. He was pristine. His skin was free of bruises, no blood anywhere in sight. The deep eye bags were gone, and his eyes seemed to have regained life to them, despite it being in death. Abe held out a hand, and this time, Raymond was positive he was the one to step forward, grabbing Abe's small hand in his own. The last note of the song was played, the violin clattered to the floor, and Raymond was nowhere to be seen. Thanks for finishing the story, Aijiro, Bakugo whispered. Kirishima didn't say anything in response. Instead, he just smiled as Bakugo cuddled closer to him. Why are you fuckers acting so weird? Bakugo yelled. Midoriya and Kirishima glanced suspiciously back and forth between each other. You'll find out soon, Midoriya said with a giggle. Well, can I at least go get a snack then? No. Midoriya and Kirishima quickly yelled in unison. Bakugo flopped back onto Midoriya's bed with a sigh. Close to 10 minutes later, a buzz came from Midoriya's phone and he jumped up, telling Bakugo that they could go now. When he stepped out of the bedroom and into the kitchen, a look of confusion crossed his face. There were people there? Inko was there, as expected, considering it was her house, but so was Kirishima's mother, Aizawa, and even his own father, Masaru. "Surprise, kid," Aizawa said. "We wanted to have a little celebration for you," Inko said, giving him a soft smile. "What the hell are we celebrating for?" Bakugo asked. "You're 6 months clean, kiddo. Your boyfriend set up the whole thing," Masaru said, walking over to Bakugo and pulling him into a large hug. There was Bakugo's favorite dinner, which everyone else struggled to eat from the amount of hot peppers that had been added. Inko had made Katsuki a cake to celebrate spicy chocolate with raspberries that he had at least 2 large slices of. They all sat in the living room together, Bakugo sitting between Midoriya and his father. Midoriya leaned over, whispering into Bakugo's ear, "You should put on a movie and I'll go grab some board games, okay?" Everybody, Kirishima, Midoriya, Bakugo, Aizawa, Masaru, Inko, and Ms. Kirishima, played card games together. Bakugo had turned on some Ghibli movies in the background. Once they reached the 3rd movie, everyone had begun to get a bit too tired to continue playing games. Bakugo returned from sitting on the floor to sitting back on the sofa, between his father and Kirishima this time, with Midoriya sitting on the other side of Kirishima. As the movie continued playing, Bakugo began dozing off, falling onto his father's shoulder, and napping there until the movie finished. "Katsuki, I need to go home soon," Masaru whispered, not wanting to wake the boy but also not wanting to leave without saying goodbye. Bakugo grumbled in response, nowhere near awake but still not fully sleeping. "I'm proud of you, Katsuki," he whispered, saying a quick, "I love you," and "goodbye." "Bye, Dad." "Love you," Bakugo mumbled back, rolling over from leaning on his father to leaning on Kirishima instead. Once everyone had left, the 3 boys returned to Midoriya's bedroom. "Katsuki," Kirishima whispered, holding both Bakugo's hands in his. "We're so incredibly proud of you. You've come so far and I know it's been hard for you, but we're both so proud." He leaned forward, placing a gentle kiss onto Bakugo's lips, and for once, there was no whines of "no fair" coming from Midoriya. When he pulled away, Bakugo was quickly wrapped in a giant hug by Midoriya, who was repeatedly whispering how proud he was of Bakugo. Gently kissing the boy as well, Midoriya pulled away for just half a second, just inches between their faces and arms still wrapped around each other's necks. "You're so strong," Midoriya whispered, his breath tickling Bakugo's face. "Thank you," he whispered back. Tears ran down his face, but for once, they weren't bad ones of sadness or insecurity. For once, they were tears of happiness. And for once, Bakugo believed him. He was strong,